Heat held the city like a fever that would not break, even in the deepest hour of night, as the moons wore thin and the roofs slept under the hush of dust. Meereen breathed out the warmth of its own stones. The great pyramid stood above it all, a mountain checkered with shadow and low lamps, its throat filled with the scent of oil and old incense, and an iron tang that clung to the tongue. Quentyn Martell had learned the measure of that taste these last weeks. It was in the barracks corridors and the dim hall where the court had gathered to hear petitions and plan parades, in the pantry where figs shrank to leather, in the galleries hung with scarlet silks gone dull with grime. But most of all it lived below, where air sat close and sour, where chains murmured against rings and darkness rippled as if it had muscle. He followed the guttering torch down the stair, and his palm was slick on the wrap of his spear. Though he had told himself he would leave the weapon at the door and go to them empty. A lord should not go empty-handed, Garrus had said with a laugh and a twist to his mouth. A man, courting dragons, least of all. Yet a lord with a spear was merely a man with a stick. Archibald Yronwood had rumbled, and the big man's small eyes had slid from Quentyn to the iron-banded door at the foot of the stair, as if he would like nothing so much as to put his shoulder to it and break the world upon it. "Keep the torch higher," Quentyn whispered. His voice came out thin and steady, like a blade too many times whetted. Garrus Drinkwater lifted his hand, and the flames light through their shadows tall and bent across the walls. He looked the way he always did in bad places, amused and tight, the corner of his mouth tucked inward upon a grin he wouldn't give. He had bound his hair back with a strip of blue silk as if the night were a feast. Archibald lumbered behind with 2 jars cradled in his arms, the wrapped necks knocking softly. The jars held oil thick as pitch, quick flame the Meereenese called it. Better for lamps, the priest had said, than for war. Quentyn's mouth remembered another name from the alleys of Volantis and the whispers of the windblown. Wildfire. He had not wanted those jars. Fire makes more fire, the old books had warned. Fire eats what it is asked to guard. But it had seemed wiser to bring a thing he did not wish to use than to wish for it later and be without. "Last chance to turn back," Garrus said lightly. Only there was nothing light in the way his eyes slid to Quentyn's hands and stayed there. No shame in finding your wits at the foot of the stairs rather than after. "Not now," Quentyn said. It surprised him how quiet his voice was, how little it trembled. Not now, when every step down had been the set of an arrow, the draw of a string, the fletching rasping over the guard. He felt his father's hand on his shoulder from another life. Heavy, deliberate, patient to a fault, Arianne had said more than once with her laugh like spilled wine. So patient he will wait for the sea to sweeten. Another had whispered in the shadow of the water gardens. And yet Doran Martell had sent his son east as one sends a black ship out upon the stepstones with a prayer tied to the mast. Patient until it mattered. This matters, Quentyn told himself as the door loomed. This is why the sun burns in Dorne, and not in vain. He rapped softly twice in the pattern they had agreed upon with the unsullied boy, who now stood watch above, and who owed them a favor for a kindness Archibald had performed with a broken wheel and a stubborn mule. The bar scraped back, iron on iron. The door opened upon a chamber that tasted of smoke and metal. There were braziers sunk in the stones of the floor like old wounds, and above them hung chains that crossed and crossed again, each link a man's hand long, each banded with riveted iron. The chamber's far end was nothing but darkness and a shape that ate light. The torch guttered in a draught and flared, and Quentyn saw the sweep of a wing in the far gloom. A ridge of pale scales that looked like moonlight grown hard, a nest of blackened chain that hugged the column like a lover. Between the braziers lay old bones gnawed to smoothness, and char had climbed the walls in scallops where fire had licked and retreated and licked again. He heard beneath the scrape of chain a sound unlike any in the world of men. The deep clogged sigh of a creature that breathed furnace air and dreamed of skies it had never known. Viserion, he thought, and his mouth shaped the name with a gentleness he had not been able to give to any woman. Rhaegal was the other, green and bronze-eyed, deeper in the dark where the torch could not reach without offending him. Viserion was the color of old ivory when the sun soaks it, and old gold when it is touched by sweat. He remembered standing in the gallery the night the queen had fed them sheep. Remembered the jeering of the pit and the tremble that ran through the air when wingbeat layered over wingbeat. The queen had been a girl and not a girl at all. She had spoken softly, and the white one had turned his long neck as if a wire ran from her voice to the base of his skull. Quentyn had felt his skin grow small upon him at the sight. If one voice could do that, why not another? If one blood could wake one fire, why not a different blood another? Stay by the door, he told Garrus, though he knew very well that Garrus would not. Ark, put the jars there. If we need to throw them and run, we throw them and run. Archibald said mildly. He set the jars down with the tenderness he gave to wine. You do your part, Fro, my prince. The name rose, and almost came between them. The old boyhood name that had clung to Quentyn as burrs cling to wool. The frog dot. It had been a kindness when only Archibald used it, a way of saying we are still the same boys who swam the pools of the Greenblood, and sneaked dates from the roofs of the merchants' houses, and wrestled in the courtyard of the Boneway. It had been a cutting when Garrus smiled with it in company, and the laugh went around. Tonight, it was neither. It was a stone set on a grave to keep it closed. Quentyn nodded. He did not go forward at once. He had read, and read again, the thin books that the Volantine Magister had shown him for a price. Half-chewed fragments, most of them, written by men who had never seen a dragon, and imagined one as a better sort of wyvern, or as a god's angry eye, or as a furnace that dreamed. But in all of them, there had been the words that mattered. Blood and fire. No saddle, no chain, no charm of hammered copper would do anything but anger what was chained here. He had a knife at his belt. He had his father's seal ring. He had his own hand. Hold the torch steady, he said to Garrus, and worked the strap from his wrist and the ring from his finger, and slid the knife from its sheath. The metal was dull, and plain, and clean. He set the spear against the wall and listened. There was no sound of boots in the corridor. The quiet above in the pyramid was the quiet of a place where too many people had learned to move without echo. Quentyn turned the knife and held its edge to the pad of his left thumb. For all the stories, he had never liked blood's warmth. The first drop welled, and he felt sick with it. He pressed his thumb to his palm and drew a line. The sting was sharp at first and then ceased to be everything. Garrus's breath hissed. Quentyn, I know what I am doing, Quentyn said, and he was astonished to hear that it might be true. He wiped the blood across his hand until the palm was slick and shone in the torch, and he began to walk forward with his hand held open and empty. He had thought he might say words. He had thought perhaps if he spoke of smoke and salt and stone, if he spoke of the heat of the Dornish noon and the glass gardens and the sea that wore itself thin against the rocks, if he spoke of the old bright banners of Nymeria's ships, and the way the queens of Dorne had kept their names through marriage, as the gods of the Rhoyne kept their aims, something might answer. He kept his mouth closed. Not silence, but a listening that was its brother. Viserion stirred. The chain spoke in a dozen iron voices as links settled upon links, and the white head lifted from the floor. A wetness, as of the sea in winter, moved through the air, a heaviness that would be steam when it met a pool. The dragon's left eye, no bigger than a man's head, rolled, and its black slit swam upon a sea of pale gold. Quentyn stopped. The head tilted. The mouth opened in something too slow to be a yawn. Teeth were there in rows, each tooth as long as his fingers and twice as thick, stained with old grease. A second breath came, a noise like sand shifting on a dune, only full of ember. He felt Garrus's hand clutch the back of his jerkin. He felt Archibald's nearness like a wall behind. He held out his bloody palm and, because it felt wise, he bent his head. Not like a servant to a lord, nor a lover to a beloved. As a man does to a strange horse in a field, he wishes to stroke and not be kicked by, offering his shape to be read and found harmless. The head came down. It was not a quick thing. There was no sudden lunge and grab, no sly pecking like a bird's, no flash of a striking snake. The neck uncoiled, a line of pale forts marching down into darkness, until their rhythm became dizzying if he watched it too closely. The nostril was a slit you could have slid your hand into. A wash of heat breathed over him, and set the blood damp on his palm. He watched the skin there matte and crackle and steam. He did not move. His throat had grown tight without his notice, and now was wider than the whole chamber. And he had to swallow, or he would choke and die. He swallowed. The eye did not blink. A forked black tongue like a strip of oiled leather slid out and laved his palm once, twice, the sting like nettles found in a hedge when you were hurrying and rash. Quentyn closed his fingers upon it. Not upon the tongue itself, but upon the air between them, as if to close his hand upon fear and wring it until something else revealed its shape beneath. He felt his hand shake and let it. "I am Prince Quentyn of Dorne," he said at last, the words rough as salt. "I have come a long way under a hot sky to meet you. I brought no chains, and I ask for none." The tongue flickered away, and the head lifted again, and a sound came from the dragon that was not a roar, not yet. It was the low iron drum roll of a boiler filling and filling. Scales rasped. The chain rose taut, and the heavy ring at the floor squealed as it turned against its seat. Garrus cursed softly behind him, and Archibald said a word that meant brace. Brace without needing to shout. Quentyn waited. He could feel the rain of his own sweat run down his temples and into his beard and drip from his jaw. He would not wipe it away. The eye, black and bright, both at once, read him. Something green flared to his right where he had left the torch's light thin, and a gust of char dashed its light over the floor. Rhaegal. Cool. Quentyn did not look. To look would be to be two places at once, and he could not be even one if he was torn that way. He kept his gaze on Viserion's eye, and remembered the pool at the water gardens, with its stone cup, where the children put their lips and drank. The water had been cool as forgiveness. He remembered the first time he had seen the sea, when he was old enough to remember. How the horizon had looked like a thin wire, on which a gull balanced without falling. He remembered his father's hands at the map table, moving two carved ships an inch closer, as if he could close loneliness that way. He stood with his palm up and wet and bloody and did not move. Rhaegal's heat rolled. The green one's chain clanked, and the hiss he gave had a wicked laughter in it that stripped skin off bones. The torch dived and rose as Garrus flinched and did not fall. Archibald took one step and stopped himself from the next by force, his foot scraping. Viserion turned his head by the smallest degree. Quentyn saw his own face now reflected in the dragon's eye, a blotched, bearded thing he hardly knew. He forced his mouth into the shape of softness. In that moment he loved the white dragon. It was as foolish and sudden a love as any boy's for a girl glimpsed from a balcony with her hair bright in the sun. And it was as true. He thought, "You are a thing whose element is the sky. And the sky is the thing that has always been just above me and just out of reach." He thought, "If I am to be broken, let it be by this." He thought nothing at all, because the head dipped again. The nostril laid itself in his hair like a brand. He flinched then. He could not help it. He choked on heat. The world went white, and then came back red. Hot wind bullied his clothes and slapped the smell of boiled leather up into his nose. He staggered one step, and the breath stopped, and did not become fire. It did not become fire. The eye blinked. The lid moved sideways and slowly, translucent. The huge mouth closed and opened once, not in hunger but like a man at the end of a long day loosening his jaw. The tongue flicked again, catching at the blood spilled and gone sticky upon Quentyn's palm. Viserion's head came down until his jaw brushed the floor. He turned the wedge of his skull until one ear frill brushed Quentyn's leg. The spikes along that frill were warm, and each had a rim of softness where they met the skin. Garrus made a sound without words. Archibald took a breath as if he had been underwater. The dragon's ear frill folded and unfolded once, like a fan. Quentyn moved his hand from palm up to palm down and set it upon Viserion's skin. He had thought it would be like armor, hard as greed, a thing to blunt blades and break arrows. It was more like a roof tile that had sat all day in sun, with an odd yielding beneath, a life that answered touch by intensifying it. He stroked once, twice, the way a man soothes a horse, along the sweep of the jaw and down the neck where scales overlapped like citron slices. Heat gathered in his own chest with each stroke. He realized he was laughing and did not know when he had started. The sound strangled and turned into a sob, and then found itself again. "Quentyn," Gareth said softly. "For the Seven's sake." "Not the Seven," Arch muttered. "Not tonight." "Help me with the chains," Quentyn said. They had studied the locks and their keys. The Unsullied boy had spoken to another boy who slept near the door, and had traded him a knife ground thin and bright for a chance to see where the keys were kept. The strongbox was simple. The trick had been the guard who was not supposed to be there, and had been there anyway, and who had chosen to piss in the corner and sing under his breath, and had only looked up when he heard the thin ring of metal, nested within metal. Gareth's hands had been quick then. Arch's had been big and sure upon the man's mouth. Quentyn did not let himself dwell long upon the rest. There had been no killing. There had been something close to it, and then a compromise that was neither brave nor shameful. And the boy now had 3 new scars on his knuckles for his trouble. And the keys were here in Gareth's sash, warm against his skin. They set to work. The first ring fought like a stubborn husband. The second slid back as sweetly as if the forge had made it to obey them, and them alone. Quentyn's hands shook so that Gareth had to take the third, and even Gareth's nimble fingers mumbled at the stubborn bar. Meanwhile, Viserion watched them with half an eye, and the other half turned toward the room's far side as if measuring the distance between his own neck and the place where darkness pooled. That darkness carried a gleam now and then, a broken green. Rhaegal was awake and listening and disinclined to agree with anything. "We free them both," Archibald said as a question. Quentyn hesitated, and in that hesitation was the shape of much blood. "No." Gareth did not look up from the key that had decided to be stubborn. "If you free one and not the other, he will kill us," Archibald finished. No heat in it, merely a fact they could set upon a shelf between bottle and bowl to take down later. Or try. Quentyn thought of the queen. The young queen who had gone from one sight to another in this hateful city, like a flame carried in a glass through a crowded hall, making shadow plays upon rough plaster, making men's mouths open. He thought of the old men whose teeth had looked like kernels of antique corn, and the young ones whose curls had gleamed with oil and their soft gold chains. He thought of the Shavapate with his face full of scars like badly sewn silk. He thought of Hisdar zo Lorak with his courtly hands and his empty eyes. He thought of the last thing the queen had done before she vanished from these steps, chained her children. No, he would not free them both. He could not. It was not only that it would kill him to do it badly. It was that he knew something now that he had not admitted to himself in his soul. He meant to claim. He meant to set a seal upon a creature to whom seals were nothing. He meant to name himself where names were ash. He meant to compete with a girl he barely knew, and with the ghosts of men who had tamed and died 3 centuries ago on another continent. He meant all that, and in the knowing he went cold and clear. His father would say, "Now you see." His sister would say, "Now you become dangerous." He bit his lip and tasted salt and iron. "No," he said again. "Viserion first. The other later, with help, or not at all." Gareth glanced up then and saw him and shook his head once, very slightly. It said, "Oh, my friend." It said, "Oh, my prince." It said, "I wish I thought you were wrong." Then the key turned with a clack loud as a bell in the enclosed space, and the last fetter slumped. Chain fell in a musical crash that made the hair on Quentyn's arms creep. Viserion flinched, not from fear but as a cat does when something strikes too close to its ear, indignant, wary. His wing rose in a white curve and knocked Gareth to his knees, with the wash of displaced air. The dragon's hoof-like feet scraped the stone and sparks jumped where old ash ground upon older steel. He unfolded himself like a letter and stood, and his long body stretched farther than Quentyn had known there was room for it to stretch. For a heartbeat, all was still, as if even the city above had paused in its itch and coughed to listen. Then the head swung, and the corridor at the far end of the chamber breathed a cooler draft, and Quentyn knew that if he did not move now, he would never move again. He stepped to Viserion's side, heedless, careful, all his motions paradoxes held together by will. The hide radiated heat. The spines along the dragon's neck looked sharp enough to cut a man to pieces and were blunt where they rose from the living. The points only lived at the tips. He thought. Saddle. He thought. Later. He thought. Climb. He had watched the queen at the pit. He had watched her at the feeding. He had watched children scramble upon colts in Dorne, and seen how the colts had tolerated it or not, depending on their temper. He caught the base of a neck spine, swung his leg over as if mounting a tall, half-wild horse without stirrups, and found his groin crushed and his hands screaming, and no purchase at all because scales were not tack. He scrabbled. He felt Gareth's breath in his back like a curse. He felt Archibald's hands shove him up from below, strong as pot defenders, sure as an ox's shoulders. He grunted and went forward on his belly, spread-eagled, his ribs complaining, his knife digging into his loin until he twisted it away in its sheath. His cheek pressed to Viserion's neck, and his hair filled with that hot salt scent again and again, until it was the whole world. He got his legs between two spines and wedged one knee there and found, by miracle, a pocket of pressure that would keep him from sliding off backward. Viserion accepted him the way a storm accepts a ship, impartially and without consent. He did not buck. He did not shake. He walked, and weeping sparks scattered from his far claws where they scuffed old cinders. There was no saddle to catch, but there were ridges and valves of hide and the messengers of heat that ran through them, which Quentyn felt more than held. He slid a hand forward and found the base of a great horn and hooked his fingers there. It burned. He did not let go. "Go slow," Archibald said to the dragon. To Quentyn, perhaps to fate itself. Big slow. Viserion went not slow and not fast exactly, but with the inexorable balance of a thing that has always been careful with its body simply because its body is too dangerous to be careless with. The corridor opened like a throat. The cool draft ran stronger, the night outside speaking through the stone with its warmer iodine taste. A flight of shallow steps went up into darkness that was the absence of torchlight rather than the presence of anything else. Viserion's head lifted. The chain at his throat jerked against the iron ring once and then slackened. Quentyn's heartbeat tripped in terror. But the ring had fallen free and slid, unbeknownst to him, to the floor with the rest of the fallen weights. He felt the dragon's breath change. It grew thinner, aspirational. He whispered, though he did not know why. "Ace, Quentyn." Gareth's voice was a crack across the space. Archibald said nothing. There was a sound to their right, a rush of chain like a waterfall of iron. Rhaegal, unamused at being left, contorted himself with a violence that shook dust from the ceiling. Fire leapt from his mouth in a sudden bright gout that filled the far corner and flowered green before fading to a colorless steam. Gareth threw himself flat, and the torch went out under his body. Quentyn saw darkness and two green eyes like coins at the bottom of a deep well. He held Viserion's horn as if it were a prayer bead, and the dragon leaped. Leaped not into sky. There was no sky here to leap into, but up the steps with 3 huge strides, across a platform of rough-hewn stone, along a wet tunnel that had been the route of water lift and supply carts since the pyramid had been a dream in a boykind's mind. He felt air thicken and then thin, felt texture change under claw, felt his own weight alternate between awful and nothing. The tunnel's end was a circular hole, no wider than 3 men side by side. But Viserion's head knifed through, as if the stone had been butter left on a hot day, and his shoulders after. Scales rasping. Quentyn bit his own cry into his teeth, and kicked his legs up and hugged with his knees and clung. Stone scraped his heel through his boot and tore leather. He did not know which foot. Rhaegal roared behind, and the tunnel's breath turned green for a heartbeat. Then the hole gave them to the open, and the night crashed down like cold water. Meereen was a bowl of embers with black bread crusts lying over it. Streets made of lions' backs and snakes' bellies. Windows winking. Braziers burning on rooftops where men could not sleep for heat and fear. Far beyond, the siege camps ringed the city like spilled lamp oil lit in patches, smoking in others. The river lay like a blade drawing its own thin, blue-black light. The wind had an edge. Quentyn's eyes filled and overflowed, and he forgot his body for a beat. Viserion spread his wings. Quentyn had not understood wings. He had thought them sails. He had thought them banners. He had thought them the broad flat bones of a bat. Viserion's wings were another set of thoughts entirely. They snapped out and filled, and the world made a sound as if a cloth had been torn across its whole breadth. The dragon did not leap upward into open air. Not yet. He crouched, and Quentyn felt that crouch in the flex of the spine beneath him, as one feels a horse gather itself, but multiplied by 100 and with something apologetic at its core, as if the earth was being warned. The first beat lifted them to the level of the terrace. The second beat made the terrace fall away. The third made the night a pressure, and a chill, and a widening. Quentyn, who had been taught from childhood not to shout, shouted. It was not a sound of defiance, or challenge, or joy. It was an animal sound that came because the animal part of him had finally found the thing it had been made to fear. They did not go far. Viserion was chained in ways beyond chain. Muscle remembered iron. Space remembered ceiling. The sky itself felt to him like a room he was not yet permitted to enter. He beat, and rose. And then, on some calculation opaque to men, he settled upon the broad ledge that girdled the pyramid near its midpoint. His claws sank into stone and crushed it. Chips leapt and sang, brief stars. Quentyn was thrown forward and slid until his ribs met the base of a spine, and there the pain was so honest he could have kissed it. He lay across the neck and gave the dragon his weight as an offering. Behind, within, beneath. The words had no direction now. Rahegel bellowed again, and from the hole that had delivered them came a gasp of smoke and the thin screams of rats lit in their nests. Garrus and Archibald were still in there, small and tender and mortal, and Quentyn's mind found this fact, and held it, and looked at it, and could not change it by looking. He rolled onto his side and dragged himself along the ridge of the neck to set his boots against a plate where they would not slip, then crawled hand and knee to the base of Viserion's skull where the hide drummed with the creature's breath. He put his mouth to the ridge and said, "Wait." It was absurd to speak to such a thing with such a word. It was absurd to imagine it had any meaning. Yet Viserion's head tilted, and one great earfurl perked toward the hole through which hot breath now sighed visibly. Quentyn could not tell if the dragon understood or if his own need had made of chance a sign. He slid down the shoulder, burning his palms and not caring, and to the ledge stone, and his boots hissed on dust. He stumbled to the hole and peered in. He saw nothing. He heard Garrus cough. "Arch has me," Garrus called hoarsely. "Clearer here?" "No, not clearer, less." He coughed again, a dry wheeze. "There's a way up and round, but there's another ring. Rahegel's got his." "Hold," Quentyn said into the hole. And if he had ever sounded like a prince in his life, it was in that moment. "Hold." He turned back to Viserion. The dragon watched him with one eye, and the other fixed upon the world beyond the ledge. His tail moved in slow calculations, each stroke making a groove in the stone that would tell some other man on some other night that a legend had been here. Quentyn went to his head and set his hands upon it, and felt the warmth there, and the dampness of breath. He thought of the old book with its pages too thin to turn quickly. He thought of the line that had made him restless for so many nights. Where men have failed, princes may yet prevail when their blood is eager and their fire is close. He had thought it folly, written by a man who had wanted to sell his book, or by a dreamer who had never woken. He had mocked it to Garrus, and laughed at it with Arch, and believed it alone. He said, "Viserion, open the way." He did not know why he thought it would help. He only knew the hole was too narrow. That stone still nestled on stone from 1,000 years ago. That Rahegel's temper would be the ruin of any man trapped near his wrath. Viserion lowered his head as if to drink and blew. It was not the Dracaries the queen had used as a whip crack in the pit. It was a breath, deliberate and steady and hot as a kiln. Stone sweated. The lip of the hole softened and slumped. He breathed again, and a flow of molten rock crept like a slow lizard down the wall, pooling in a lip that bulged and then sheared off and fell with a sound like the end of the world, into the darkness. Quentyn staggered back with a cry, and felt heat crowded like beggars against his cheeks. He shut his eyes against the brightness and opened them again, because he would not miss this. He saw the tunnel's mouth slump wider. He shouted their names. He heard, after a moment that stretched to a year, Archibald swear in a way that was almost a laugh, and Garrus cough and say, "Ugly friend, I will kiss you until you beg me to stop." They came crawling like two big cats dragging their bellies. Their hair had singed at the ends and their eyebrows were black smudges. Garrus' cheek had blistered in a neat oval where some fleck of stone had kissed it. Archibald's beard had shortened itself by inches. They rolled to the ledge and lay panting like landed fish. Quentyn laughed then until the ledge itself seemed to shake. He clapped Arch's shoulder. Arch's hand came up like a slow tide and set itself on Quentyn's neck, heavy and sure. Garrus, breathless and ash-smeared, lifted his head and saw Viserion, and smiled with a fragility no one had ever accused him of having. "Well," he rasped, "that's a handsome horse you've stolen, my prince." Quentyn looked up at the dragon, and the dragon looked back down at him. And something in the look was not a bargain, not a contract, not a thing that could be sealed with wax or witnessed by priests of 100 faces. It was a look the sea might give a cliff that stands in it year after year. Acknowledgement, warning, a patience that contained hunger. Quentyn felt the shape of his life swell to contain this moment. His love for his father, which had always been a shaded thing, warmed and grew teeth. His memory of Arianne added to itself a new line around the mouth that said she would tease him until they were old, and that he would let her, and that he would have for once the better story. His fear of failing Dorne broke not like glass but like clay, slumping and taking on a new curve that might hold water if fired. He put his hand again upon Viserion's hide and said, almost to himself, "We will do this gently." The city did not stay asleep. There were cries now, and the thin tinny beat of a bell from some roof altar, and the bark of a dog, and then the dog's sudden silence. The wind carried a taste from the camps beyond the river, onions and dung and the dry cough of the pale mare. The knight's voice grew busy. Quentyn knelt by Garrus and tore a strip from his own sleeve and made a pad, and soaked it with the wineskin and pressed it to the blister on Garrus' cheek. "Handsome scars make you more dangerous," he said without thinking. "I was dangerous before," Garrus croaked. "Now I am beautiful as well." He smiled and shut his eyes, and did not flinch when Quentyn pressed harder. Archibald sat up and rubbed his beard with regret. "They will come," Arch said, nodding toward the confusion rising along the lower terraces. "Men with spears who never thought they would use them. Men with nets who do not know what a net is for. Men with orders from the Shevapate and other men with orders from Hisdar, and each will think the other traitor. Some will look and piss themselves and go home. Then?" Quentyn listened and heard the shape of a plan slip into place the way a stone finds its old bed. "We must not be here when the last sword arrives," he said. He stood, his legs shaking, and met Viserion's eye once more. "Will you carry me down again? Will you climb? Or will you fly?" Viserion spread his wings a little and folded them. He lowered his head to the ledge and breathed upon it, as if scenting a thing that had been left there for him. He did not kneel as a horse does. He did not acknowledge the problem as men do with words. He turned his shoulder toward Quentyn in the slightest of ways, and in that gesture was more granting than any court bow. Quentyn climbed at once, without grace, and with only the carefulness of long practice on roofs and walls, where one must sometimes move to keep from being seen. He threw his leg over and gripped and set his jaw, and found the place where spine and neck made a cradle and took it for his own. "Garrus," he said, "stay with Arch. Make for the old gate with the broken tiles. If we are parted, go to the tattered prince and tell him the price just changed and not to his liking." "Changed?" Garrus muttered as he struggled up. "To what?" "To a kingdom. To a little golden horn to summon our doom. To your father shaking his head for 40 hours together while the maesters bleed him. And now, to a city that will not open its mouth upon us," Quentyn said. He meant it. He meant to take this thing he had done and place it before Hisdar like a glistening fruit. And then he meant not to let Hisdar bite it. He meant to set himself between the queen's enemies and her absence. He meant to be an ally greater than a suitor. He meant to pull Dorne through the gates of this place and make the war beyond the river tilt. He meant so many things that if he spoke them, They would spill and run useless down his shirt. He said, instead, "Go." Garrus looked at Arch and nodded. "We go slow," he said, which meant we go fast enough to live. He slung one arm under Arch's and guided him toward the stair that circled the pyramid like a snake wrapping a pillar. They were shadows already. Quentyn breathed and felt Viserion breathe with him, or imagined he did, and found no difference between imagining and truth that mattered. "Down," he said. "Down." The dragon did not trouble to tell him what he had decided. He stepped to the ledge's lip, weighed the air with his head, and dropped off as a hawk drops. Quentyn's stomach leaped into his mouth. The earth rushed up and then changed its mind and grew gentle under the wash of wings. They sank past a terrace, where 3 men with spears gaped, and one fell to his knees, and the other 2 ran. Clattering. They sank past a balcony where a woman watched with her hand upon her child's hair and did not scream because she had no breath left for it. They came to the broad entry where the columns at the pyramid's base were thick as the trunks of old trees, and the portico above them was carved with 1,000 leopards dancing. Viserion's claws took the slope of the stair there and held fast. He went down as if he had learned to do it in some other life. Quentyn clung and dared a glance. The night pressed close and alive and full of peering. Fire made crowns for men who had not earned them. The river's long voice talked in its sleep. Far off, another sound reached him. A roar not born of either dragon below. Something larger, stranger, coming like a memory from a different part of the world. He ignored it. Later, everything later. At the foot of the pyramid, where the statues of ancient kings rode lions with the lions' paws on their shoulders, as if all strength must be shared, a knot of men in pale kilts, the king's men by their collars, ran forward with nets under their arms, as if they hunted stags. Quentyn laughed. A terrible, shaken little sound. Viserion did not wait to be instructed. He turned his head and blew a breath unpleasant as the inside of a kiln, and the nets shrank in the men's hands like fat on a pan. The men threw themselves upon their faces and smelted their own courage to the stone. Quentyn felt a fierce tenderness for them, and another for himself and his friends, and for the city that did not know itself. He nudged with his knees, and the dragon moved, and that was command enough. They went along the street that circled the pyramid like an ornament. People came out of doorways and vanished again. Someone threw a bucket of water at them, and it flew apart in a silver flower that had no effect upon anything. A priest of a forgotten god shouted an invocation that turned into a squeal when Viserion snorted and raised the priest's hair straight up in the heat. Quentyn's cheeks ached with the smile he could not stop. They moved not like victors and not like thieves. They moved like those who have opened a door that had been painted shut for years and found air beyond, heavy and new and bearable. Later, he thought, he would arm men and ride to the river and set fire to the siege engines and scatter the Yunkish host like chaff. Later, he would go beyond the walls and find the queen or the path to her. Later, he would send word west by swift runners and swifter ships with seals upon seals. And his father would sit with the letter turned upside down in his hands because his eyes did not need to see the words to know their shape. Later, he would put a saddle on this white back, a saddle that did not burn. Later, he would speak to the Green One and not be killed. Later, he would pay debts to Sellswords and buy new ones and keep none for long. Later, he would meet a woman from the islands beyond Volantis, whose voice had haunted him in the cinnamon-sour taverns by the quay. And they would speak of what a prince thinks when he holds a dragon's horn. Now, he would not fall. Now, he would not be burned. Now, he would learn the way a dragon chooses to turn in a street. Now, he would stoop to let a child touch a scale with her finger and leave a smudge there that would not matter, and would matter very much. Now, he would take Viserion into the deep court of the pyramid, where shadows made a grove, and wait for his 2 friends, who would come with soot on their faces, and scorn in their jokes and fear in the whites of their eyes, and there they would plan what to do before the city remembered that it had officers and laws, and the kind of courage that is just obedience. They came to the court. It was empty in the way a thing can be empty when every stone holds the memory of shouting. Viserion settled and folded his wings, and the court fell into a heat that made all other heat seem friendly. Quentyn slid down and landed light on his feet for so heavy a man, and then had to lean at once against the dragon's shoulder as if he had been struck. He bent and put both hands upon his knees, and laughed and coughed and laughed again. His eyes stung. His cheeks were raw with wind, and with his own skin's misunderstanding of the air. He straightened and put his palm upon Viserion's neck, and the dragon turned his head and placed the flat of his muzzle against Quentyn's chest, and pushed very gently until Quentyn took the step backward he was being asked to take. "Very well," he said. "I shall not crowd you." "It's called not being rude," Garrus said from the court's arch, breathless. He and Arch had found a path that did not involve having to explain themselves to men with spears. They looked like men who had been inside a chimney and fallen out. Garrus's eyes widened and narrowed and widened again at the sight of Quentyn and the white dragon in such casual congress. 7 hells. 7 little hells nested in a big one. Dendero. Arch came forward. Slow, without taking his gaze off Viserion. He stopped at a pace he deemed respectful, and planted his feet, and crossed his arms. "Good horse," he said gravely. "Pretty." Viserion flicked an ear frill as if granting him a point. Garrus snorted, and then hissed as the blister on his cheek protested. "We are all mad," he concluded. "But our madness has better taste than most men's sanity." "What now, my prince?" "Before every commandant in Marine remembers that they like to be obeyed." "Now," Quentyn said, and for the first time the word felt like something he could put his entire weight upon, "we show ourselves to the men I need, the ones who wear the lions' heads on their shoulders, and the ones who shave their cheeks into maps of scars. We don't bow to one to anger the other. We stand in the court and speak softly so both must lean to hear us. We say, the queen is not here, but her fire has not gone out. We say, the war will be fought with different balances. We say, Dorne does not come begging. We say, if you want to live, attach yourself to my patience." Merci. Garrus's eyebrows climbed toward hair that no longer sheltered them. "Ah," he said. "We are princes again. Only if it works," Arch observed. "I will stand nearby and look like a wall. If it doesn't work, I will be a wall." A flutter of movement along the upper walk drew Quentyn's eye. 2 figures stood silhouetted, one a shadow shaped like a coal stick, tall and narrow, the other wider at the shoulders, helmet making of the head, something smooth and amphora-like. The Unsullied had a way of arriving when you had convinced yourself they had not been listening. Quentyn lifted his chin. He did not draw himself up. He did not puff himself out. He found the stance his father had taught him when he was 13 and practicing with a spear in the garden. The one that said, "I am here, and you will not move me as easily as you think." "Let them come," he said. He looked up at the sky above the stone rim. It was less black now, more like old velvet near dawn. The first gull had not yet cried at the river's market, but it was near. Marine would wake soon in the full and furious way of a city that has lost and found and lost again. Let them all come. Viserion settled, an avalanche contained, and laid his head along the cool of the court's floorstones. His eye remained open and watchful. The gold in it was not a human gold. Quentyn stood beside him, a hand on hide, and felt in the long, slow turbine of that breathing, a future beating its wings within reach. He imagined the river running backward, the ships running east with banners he knew, the steppe swallowing its own dust as hooves and feet and hope shook it, the hiss of grass when a dragon's shadow crossed it. He did not think, in that moment, of what dragons have always demanded as price. He did not think of straw men blackened and fierce on their stakes, or of small figures running ablaze with their arms outstretched like supplicants. He did not think of the old men of Valyria with their pale hands burning maps, and the maps turning to ash, and the ash rising like a second weather over the city that had thought to own the world. All that could wait. Patience is not merely delay, his father had once told him. It is the mastery of the shape a thing takes when you hold it longer than you wish to. The first of the Queen's officers entered the court. Skahaz Mo Kondak, the Shavapate, with his ravaged cheeks and his eyes like dark fruit left too long in the sun. Beside him, 3 unsullied with their spears upright and unshaking, and behind them, a file of brazen beasts, wearing masks of birds and beasts, a lion with a dent in its brow, a jackal with paint rubbed thin. Their feet kept a rhythm that had been born in some training yard far away and long ago, and had outlasted the men who had planted it in the dirt. Skahaz stopped a prudent distance from the dragon. He did not bow. He did not frown. He looked as if he were tasting something, and could not decide whether it had been salted. His eyes slid from Viserion to Quentyn and back. He raised his hand, and the brazen beasts behind him stopped so perfectly that the echo of their last step tidied itself away. "Prince," he said, "it seems you have found your queen's lost darling." Quentyn heard in the man's voice 100 knives arranged neatly in a box. He inclined his head a fraction, enough to say, "I am not below you, nor above." His palm, resting on Viserion's hide, left a print of sweat that steamed and vanished. "She is not lost," he said. "Nor, I think, am I." The Shavapate smiled with half his mouth. "We shall see," he murmured. He tipped his head, curious as a crow seeing a mirror. "What will you do with what you have taken, Prince Quentyn? And what will you pay for it?" "Bendaral." Quentyn felt the son of Dorne on his shoulders, though it was not yet day here. He felt his father's shadow, long and cool, and Ariana's laughter sharpening something like a knife, and then setting it carefully down. He felt the heat of the dragon under his hand, an answer that was not words. He said, "I will do what the queen could not do here, because she had other work, and I will pay what a prince must pay when he means his word. I will pay myself." Skahaz's eyes studied him, narrow and not unkind. He had the look of a man who had made and remade his opinions more often than his clothes, and kept both sharp. "All men pay themselves first," he said. "It is whether they leave anything upon the table for others that decides what names we carve upon their graves." He clicked his tongue softly against his teeth. It might have been approval. "Come, Prince, let us see what the city wants of you, and then let us walk to the walls and look upon the camps and tell each other stories." Quentyn nodded once, slowly, and stepped away from Viserion. The dragon's eye narrowed and the lid slid half down. To a man it would have looked like lassitude. To a dragon it might be attention. Quentyn took 3 steps and turned, and the dragon took 3 steps at his shoulder, like a hound who knows the trick of staying at heel and chooses to honor it for a time. The Unsullied flinched and held, and the brazen beasts' masks had no expressions to lose. They went out under the arch and into the street that would carry them to the heart of the city. The dawn crept into Meereen and found it anxious and awake. Men gaped from doorways and women turned their faces away, and children shrieked in the naked way of children who see wonder without knowing what price it will demand. Quentyn walked with his hand upon the dragon and did not look to either side. He listened ahead, to where the river and the war met, and talked in voices old as tide and young as panic. He was not afraid. He was not brave. He was a man who had been given the one thing he had not even dared to beg the gods for: the chance to be himself without shame. And he meant to spend it as if it were a coin whose metal was too soft to hoard. Above, the sky took on a thin color like the inside of a shell. Somewhere, a cockerel, confused by so much heat and no true morning, crowed anyhow. Viserion breathed, and the breath rose and flickered and vanished. Garrus came up on his left and Arch on his right, and if they walked a little bowed and sore and scorched, they walked nonetheless. The Shavapate paced ahead with the patience of a man who has made a machine of his city and waits to hear how it ticks this new day. The Unsullied spears pricked the air like points on a crown. The brazen beasts padded. Quentyn thought, "I am the son of the sun, and the sun today is a white dragon." The day would be long. It would break and mend and break again. Men would kneel, and some would bite their tongues to keep from speaking, and some would be fools and die because they were brave in the wrong way. Before noon, someone would try to kill him. By evening, he would have learned 2 things about dragons that no book had told him. Before the second day, he would come to the wall and look out upon the camps and decide to make a thing happen that could not be unmade. He did not know any of that as he walked. He knew only the pressure of heat under his palm and the feeling that the shape of his life had finally found a mold that fit. He kept walking. He thought of his father and the water gardens, and a boy with his feet in a pool, and a frog between his knees, and a sunburn that would peel. He walked into the day with the patience of one who finally had something worth being patient for. The streets received them like an old riverbed takes the first water after drought, cracked and ready, the dampness only a promise. Meereen wore its night badly. It was a city made for daylight's cruelty, for balconies that looked down like judges in squares, where hot air stalled and shouted. In the thin hour before dawn, men whispered in doorways, and women loosened their hair to cool their necks, and children ran even when told not to because running at night made them feel like ghosts who did not have to listen. Quentyn kept his hand on the dragon's neck, and felt the small changes travel through hide and scale, the way a dog's skin flickers when a gnat lands and is tolerated or not. Viserion's breath went long and slow, as if the creature had decided upon patience as a game to be played with himself. The Shave-a-Pate walked half a dozen paces ahead, his scars clean as script, each line a lesson he would expect others to have read. The Unsullied moved without noise, and if Quentyn had not seen their spears, he would have forgotten they were there until a door opened, and a man looked out with a knife, and then changed his mind and shut the door again, slowly, respectfully, as if fear itself could be offended by haste. They came beneath an arch whose carvings were tired, cats with their faces worn to smooth pebbles by 1,000 hands and smokes and rains. A fountain lisped in the court beyond, old water making a small sound as if to reassure itself it still could. Torchlight pecked the faces of the men waiting there, and made them look like people seen in a dream. Too important to forget, too dim to be fully known. Quentyn recognized Skahaz's lieutenants only as the masks they wore. Ibis, bear, serpent, one with a cracked jackal that showed a sliver of the mouth beneath when the man spoke. The mouths were grim. There was no hiss of treachery here, only the thick breath of a city that wanted to hold itself together by any means. Another figure stepped from shadow, a man gone white about the brows, the rest of his hair close-cropped, a neat old sword hanging by his side as if it were his third hand. Quentyn had seen him at a distance before, a grace note on the edge of the Queen's orchestra, keeping time with his eyes when others lost it. Up close, Ser Barristan Selmy was smaller than the Tails and larger than any man. The Tails had given him height, the man wore gravity instead. He looked at the dragon first, and his face altered in a way not many people saw, the careful lines softening. A boy's astonishment walking out of a long hallway to show itself. Then he looked at Quentyn, and the boy vanished, and the old knight's courteous hardness returned, and something within Quentyn settled as if a stone had been set right. "Prince Quentyn," the old knight said, "you do your house both honor and peril." "My lord," Quentyn said, unable to help the very slight bow that came of itself. "I am as surprised as anyone to be so dangerous." Skahaz clicked his tongue softly, a sound Quentyn would come to recognize as approval and annoyance in equal measure. "We will speak inside," the Shave-a-Pate said. "Walls are better at keeping ears in than out, and there are too many ears out here that would be glad to keep nothing else." He gestured, and the brazen beasts flowed like sober wine into the great pyramid's side door. Not the broad, grand mouth that gave on the square where petitions were heard, but a servant's throat cut into old stone and seldom used by those who wore galled on their ankles. Viserion hesitated at the threshold. His shadow filled the court. His breath moved the torch flames like reeds. The passage was tall and wide enough in the end, if narrow to the eye, and he set one claw upon the first flag and then another, and the stone complained under him in a deep, steady tone, as if the pyramid itself had been waiting too long to be useful. Quentyn went at his shoulder, one hand on hide, the other on horn, when the corridor tilted and then righted, trusting the body. He had never trusted anything so completely. It felt like stepping onto ice sure it would not break, and then hearing it sing beneath you and discovering the song was yours. The room Skahaz chose had once been a counting house, or so its shelves and cubbies said. It smelled of the flat dust of paper and the headier dust of old cloths, left folded too long. The table in the center had been made for numbers, not men, and its edges were cut with little scallops of ink stains, where clerks had tapped their pens to coax the last drop. Someone had swept. Someone else had set 2 lamps upon the table, their oil sweet with something that made Quentyn think of cloves ground between teeth. The lamps burned steadily even when Viserion came in after them. The air did not dare move much. Skahaz took his place with his back to the wall that had no door. Barristan stood rather than sat. The Unsullied set their spears at a slant and were statues cut from an iron-smelling stone. Garrus and Archibald came in last, and Garrus found a cupboard to lean upon as if it were a lover met in a city where you had promised yourself to take care. Arch stood with his hands at his sides and studied the map Skahaz unrolled, as if it were a man he might someday have to wrestle. Bay of Dragons, Skahaz said, tapping the pale blue with a blunt forefinger. The Yunkai still call it otherwise and spit when they do. They have set their ships in a curve, like a man's smile he thinks is sly. And they have galleys with gold-painted beaks, to ram and tall cogs for show. They have merchants who have never been at sea but know how to take profit. And on land they have built their pretty engines and set them to throwing this city's filth back into its mouth. We have been catching what we can. What we cannot catch, we burn with lime. What we cannot burn, we bury. We are running out of earth. Now, we can break the engines, Quentyn said, surprising himself that his voice did not tremble. He did not say I can. He had learned that already today. The dragon made it true, and there was no need to say the pronoun aloud to let it grow too large and hungry. A few precise strikes. The wood must be seasoned. The ropes can be brought to ash. And the galleys? Barristan asked, mild as rainfall. What of ships? Fire is king on water until the wind makes rebellion. And the wind has been ungovernable since the Queen flew. If you burn the nearest fleet, will the smoke not cover the second well enough to offer them our throats? Dendi. Quentyn put his palm flat to Viserion's hide as if there were answers there in Bravosi script. The dragon shivered once as if a fly had found a tender place and was gone. On water, Quentyn said, I would be cautious. The heat returns. It is easy to make steam where you do not want steam, my lord, and burn not ships but men who did not pick this war. He thought of sailors whose whole world was rope taste on their hands, and the way a hull moves at night, as if something alive under you turns and sighs. On land, the engines first. After that, the commander's tents. After that, if the gods love us, the elephants. Then, There was a small silence. Skahaz's eyes had not moved from Quentyn's face since he began. The old knights had moved from dragon to prince to map, and now to the space between Quentyn's shoulder and his ear, as if the answer lay there thin like a vein under skin. At last Skahaz said, You have a care I am not accustomed to seeing in men menaced by glory. Good, care is a blade as much as any else. He smoothed the map. What do you want, Prince Quentyn Martell, in words that can be weighed and measured? He did not say what will you ask for when you are done. He did not need to. Quentyn's heart lifted, and then became very heavy. He wanted to speak like a boy, say I want to go home with a dragon at my shoulder and my father's hand, when it comes down upon my neck, to tremble. I want to make my sister laugh, and care for my people, so that their mouths are full, and their backs not broken. I want to get old in a place where the sun is a friend and not a weapon. He did not speak like a boy. I want the Queen's cause strengthened, he said. I want it to be seen as an ally, not a thief. I want to live long enough to send word to Dorne that the promise is not ash in our mouths. I will not be a cat's paw for your enemies within Meereen, nor theirs for mine. Skahaz's mouth curled. Within Meereen, he said gently, there are no men without enemies. There are only men who pick them wisely. He glanced at Barristan as if they shared a long-standing joke. The old knight did not smile. You will have your chance to show Meereen what you are. Skahaz went on. The engines, then. At first light, those nearest the river. We will send runners with bells tied at their ankles to draw eyes up as your dragon drops out of a sky that is not yet bright. What you can burn, burn. What you cannot, frighten. And leave us something for the second day. Men fight well when they are ashamed of yesterday. Men throw. Tonight, Quentyn said. It came out before he had waited against prudence. He tasted the word. Before dawn. While the men in the camps believe I am some tale, their wives will punish them for believing. Then Dawa. Barristan inclined his head, slow and grave. Before dawn then, he said. I will make certain the city's archers do not panic and take you for an omen they must shoot. Garrus stirred, and some of his old mischief peeped through ash. I would thank you for that, sir, he said. I have no wish to be picked out of the sky with a washerwoman's arrow, and become a song the fishwives sing while they beat their linen. You will not be in the sky, Arch pointed out, not unkindly. Unless the plan improves. It always improves when I am not on the ground, Garrus said, and raised a hand to the blister on his cheek with a wince. Skahaz snapped his fingers once. A brazen beast in a crane's mask stepped forward without being summoned, as if the sound had been spoken to him alone. This man's face needs a salve. Skahaz said, Send for the herb wives and the foreign priest who smells of smoke and has a red scarf, the one with the eyes like a dog that has slept in ashes. He owes me 2 favors. Nan? Most men do, Garrus murmured. Enough under his breath to be brave, not enough to be suicidal. Quentyn shot him a look, and the young knight made a small show of contrition with his eyebrows. Prince, Barristan said, and he used the title as a courtesy and a leash both. You will need a harness. Quentyn blinked. I will need the gods, he said dryly, but I will accept leather. Both, the old knight agreed. One can keep you from falling, the other from despair. He hesitated, weighing pride against speed. I have a thought. A saddle made not unlike a destrier's, but with a high cantle and pommel, and a seat deep enough a man cannot be jolted free by the first careless wing. Straps that go about the creature's forechest and behind the shoulders. Cinches doubled. A breastband. It will not be comfortable. It may be survivable. He half smiled, a small concession to possibility. I have known men who would prefer discomfort to death. Name them, Garrus said. I want their courage to rub off on me. I cannot, Barristan said, for they mostly died later doing something else just as foolish. He turned to Skahaz. There are leather workers in the lower bazaar. The queen had harness made for her dragons when they were smaller. We can look at what is left of those and change it by the scale of what we now have. The craftsmen who made them will have opinions. We will take the opinions we like. He looked at Quentyn. It will not be ready by dawn. He did not apologize. He stated a limit as a man might say a mountain is there, stubborn and content in its place. Then dawn comes without it, Quentyn said. He knew he was being reckless. He tasted it and found it not sweet. I will take rope and a belt, an Arch's hand if my courage fails at a bad moment. Nensumtander. Arch grunted in a way that meant his hand would be there, whether asked or not. Barristan's careful mouth made a thinner line, but he nodded. Rope then, he said, and a long knife next to it to cut the rope in a hurry if it begins to strangle you. One can die very neatly that way while trying not to. Then, Skahaz rolled the map up and thumped its end on the table as if to fix the plan into the wood. We will need a name for this, he said. There are men who will not move unless a thing has a name. It is a stupidity that makes the world easier. Call it morning, Quentyn said. He felt the word fit. Call it the first breath after choking. Skahaz's eyes glittered. That is good. I will call it that when I must make the cowards feel clever. For the brave, it will simply be fire. They did not waste time. Meereen had few servants left who did anything merely because it was asked. The war had traded such people for soldiers, and soldiers expected to be moved like pieces, or consulted like partners, depending on whether they had eaten well lately. The brazen beasts moved more quickly than Quentyn would have thought men in masks could. Leather workers were roused and brought while still rubbing sleep from their palms. A knot of them stood before Viserion and stared up and made soft little sounds of astonishment that did not resolve into words. One, a woman with sinewy arms and a black braid to her waist, found her tongue first and said, "We can rig something to keep your bones in one sack, but the creature will hate it. If I were a dragon, I'd hate it. Does your dragon like you enough to endure it? Then see. He tolerates me, Quentyn said. We have an understanding. I will not press more than I must. Good, she said. Men who press too soon get pressed, and more flat than they bargained for. She turned and snapped at her apprentices as if the dragon were a problem in buckles and straps, and not a piece of magic that could turn the room to light and scream with a breath. That was the moment Quentyn decided to trust her. While Skahaz's people and the leather workers argued over girths and padding, Quentyn stole a half hour and took it outside to the court with the fountain that lisped and let the air from the river stroke the sweat off his neck. Garrus came and leaned beside him. The blister on his cheek had been painted with something dark and cool, and he smelled of smoke and bruised herbs and another smell beneath, something like clean iron. You look as if you were thinking of asking the gods to step aside and let you use their chair, Garrus said mildly. As your friend, I counsel humility. As your vassal, I recommend very loudly that whatever you ask be asked in small bits. Mouse. Quentyn smiled without wanting to. The smile felt fragile, like a bowl fired only once. I am thinking of Arch's hands, he said, and of the boy in me who would have been pleased to die to see a dragon's eye up close. He is still with me. He thought of the way Viserion had set his muzzle against his chest and pressed. Not a threat, not a shove, not a kiss, just a statement. Move. I am thinking of my father's patience. I am trying to borrow some of it. Garrus's eyes went soft with something like pity, and then sharpened at once, as if he recognized the insult in pity and refused it on Quentyn's behalf. You have never lacked patience, he said. You only lacked a stage big enough to make it look like a virtue. That is my generous friend's opinion for the morning. Later, if you begin to strut, I will revise it. Quentyn nodded once. He did not say thank you because what Garrus had offered was not a favor, but a way to stand that would not make his legs shake. They stood with the fountain's voice between them, and the first seabirds began to turn and lift and carry little coins of light on their wings from some hidden east. Arch joined them, set his weight upon the coping as if he were a great jar put down for a moment, while a man caught his breath. If you fall, he said, fall toward me. I can catch parts. Which parts? Garrus asked. I wish to reserve one. I may need it someday. Arch considered, gravely. The head, he decided. If I catch that, the songs will be less insulting. Catch the head, Quentyn said. We will leave the rest to the gods. He looked up at the pyramid's face, with its long stairs and its old shadow, and the places where smoke had made finger-smeared marks on the stone. He wanted to climb for the sake of climbing, the way you do when a thing has been there forever, and your body is young and silly and wants to measure itself. He suppressed the urge with an old man's care and walked back inside to where leather and argument waited. They worked fast because fear made them nimble. A saddle that would have taken 3 days was made ugly in 3 hours, and ugly was good when a man wanted to be alive and not beautiful. The seat was deep and slick with oil that would cure later to suppleness. For now, it made Quentyn feel he sat on the back of some oily whale rising. 2 stout horns fore and aft to catch him when the air made him foolish. Straps like the arms of strong men. A breastband to keep the saddle from sliding when the dragon lifted. A thick pad under it all to spare hide from chafing. The first try made Viserion grunt like a man insulted by a coarse joke. The second drew only one side eye. The third he tolerated as a king tolerates the presence of someone useful who laughs too loudly. He was gentle with the hands that tied and adjusted. He could see in the leather workers' shoulders the exact moment when they accepted that their work would not be their epitaph. He could hear it leave their breath. When they were done, when the last strap had been tugged and the last hole punched, Quentyn ran his palm along the dragon's neck, where the saddle's edge lay. Viserion half closed one eye, and if dragons had words, Quentyn thought the word would have been very well. Rope, Baristan reminded, and Quentyn tied a length from his own belt to the forward horn and from it to a loop sewn into his jerkin, then back again. He could cut it free with a jerk if he must. He hoped he would never must. Garrus stood with one foot upon a coffer and made notes to no purpose on his palm. With a piece of charcoal. Arch tested the straps with his weight and made a grunt of approval that had less to do with leather than with the men who had made it. "Be careful," Barristan said. The old knight's voice had a thread through it that Quentyn could not name until he saw the man's hand lift a fraction, as if to touch Quentyn's shoulder, and then fall again. It was not caution that lived in that voice, or not only. It was loss. The old man had poured too many young men into cups that were broken. "Remember that a dragon is not a horse." "I know," Quentyn said. "A horse does not make the world look small." He put his foot to the stirrup they had cleverly not called a stirrup, and swung up. His thigh burned where the saddle's roughness caught. His ribs protested under the straps that crossed his chest. He found the seat. He found it again when it tried to shake him, because he refused to feel that shake as anything but an old friend's rough greeting. Skahaz came to stand in the doorway and watched without expression. "I have sent for runners," he said. "They will make noise and draw eyes and die if they must." "Not today," Quentyn said automatically, as a prince says when a thing is too terrible to bear, and he must pretend he can order it away. He drew a breath deep enough to make his bruises complain, and another to apologize to his bones. He stroked Viserion's neck, and Viserion gave him a slice of side to pat, not affection and not scorn, a neutrality that had to be earned each time. "We go," he said. They went. The city lifted under them like a lid, and then was gone. The night took them into itself and became a river through which they swam. The harness turned the dragon's power from a thing that wanted to throw Quentyn to a thing that wanted to keep him, and could do so if he was clever. The ropes pressed into his chest and thighs in places that would make grief of him later, when he counted his bruises and named them. For now they were simply part of the new language his body was learning at speed. Viserion beat once, twice, and the pyramid's flank fell away, and the city opened like a mouth to speak a word it had never said. He saw the river, gleaming like a knife someone had licked clean and then forgotten to put away. He saw the great curve of the bay, the ships like black teeth in a smile made too wide. Fires burned along their decks, fools' lanterns for men who had convinced themselves that fire could be tamed with distance. He felt the air where it changed from the city's weighted breath to the flat taste above water. He heard the world narrow into the hinge and sweep of wings, and the steady bellows work of the body below him, and the small whistling of the harness straps where the wind found chinks. The tents of the besiegers made a pallor that moved when it should not, and lay still when it should. There were places where men danced or fought or slept. There were places where men lay very still because some thin-boned thing had passed over them during the night and left them a lesson written on their brow. There were engines, black silhouettes against a dull red sky, their arms cocked or at rest, their ropes humming to themselves. Quentyn felt the first stirrings of something like greed when he saw them, the greedy need a craftsman feels when he knows he can break a rival's tool and make of its pieces something better. He spoke without thinking. "Gentle," he said. "We go in gentle. We sting. We do not gorge. We return." Viserion's right ear frill tipped. The left stayed flat. The dragon slid his tail a little and dropped the left wing a hair, and the world turned that way without protest. Quentyn did not need reins. Reins would have been a lie. The creature kept his own counsel. A man who insisted otherwise deserved to die for that insistence, and the dragon would provide the courtesy of making it quick. They came in low on the first engine. Men looked up as men will at any bird. Then the shape resolved, and what breath they had they used for shouting. The runners with bells went the other way, toward another engine, as Skahaz had promised. And their men turned their heads like oxen distracted by a fly and missed the white drop that came from the other side. Viserion did not flare in anger. He did not roar to announce himself. He opened his mouth as a man opens a door to a room he knows contains a tool he wants. Heat rolled out with logic in it, not fury. The engine's arm warped, its timber turning black along the grain as if some slow disease had bitten it all at once. The ropes shrank, hummed high and wild like a woman's scream. Quentyn smelt tallow, then oak, then a sleeping thing in the wood that woke and cried and died. Men ran. One fell and got up again without his hair. Viserion beat twice and decided to climb a little and fall a little and climb again. a rhythm that set Quentyn's guts to dancing, and then, after a few breaths, to obedience. They slid to the second engine like a safe thief under an ox cart. The second went easier for knowing the first. Fire bit. Rope spun away in black petals. A man with more courage than sense stood upon the engine's base and shook his fist and shouted something that sounded like a promise to have the dragon's head for a chamber pot. Viserion lifted his own head and breathed, and the man vanished. Quentyn closed his eyes. He had not meant to see that. When he opened them, he had to remind himself again to breathe. It was too easy already to lose breath to fear and call it reverence. The third engine was near a line of tents with painted hangings, and a row of elephants, standing like gray, slow-witted hills, with eyes that betrayed them. The beasts' mahouts were not there. The men at the engine were. Quentyn saw a young boy among them, who could not be more than 12, his hands on a smaller rope, his mouth very determined, as if he were playing a game with old men, and would win by refusing to listen. Quentyn's mouth dried. "Not that one," he said into the wind. "Not that." He touched Viserion's neck back near the saddle, a feather touch. The dragon dipped, then climbed. They took the fourth engine instead of the third, and the boy looked up and shouted a slur in a tongue. Quentyn did not know and felt grateful for not knowing. Later, Garrus would laugh at him for that mercy and call him a poet. Later, Arch would nod once and say nothing. For now the knowledge sat in Quentyn's gut, like a small heavy stone that would never shift. They did not linger. The sky lightened, and people remembered they had eyes. Shouts spread like a spill of milk from cup to cup. A horn blew that had been waiting all night to blow, and the sound made Quentyn's skin prickle unpleasantly. It was not battle, not exactly, but a call to the gods to look, and what the gods look at, they often touch. He patted the neck. "Enough," he said. "We will do more tonight." He did not add, "if I am not dead," because he had learned to be careful of such additions. They were like pebbles in a man's mouth that invite him to choke. They rose gently, and then strongly. Arrows went up after them, most like the prayers of a man who has corrupted the prayer and knows it. A few hissed past close enough to make Quentyn want to tuck his head behind the leather horn. He refrained with a stubbornness that felt like an old familiar friend. Viserion did not notice arrows except to shiver when one kissed a scale and snapped. They crossed the outer ring of fires, where dung dried during the day burned slow and low at night and made the air taste of old kitchens and old war. They crossed the river's black blade. They came over the wall to the first astonished archers of Meereen, who ducked and swore, and then laughed in the particular relief of men who have not killed their own. They came to the court before the pyramid in a fall that was not a fall, because Viserion turned it into a settling, his wings scooping wind as if it were warm soup, his claws taking hold as if he remembered the exact chips in the stone he had made earlier. Quentyn sat, then sagged, then made himself sit again. The leather had rubbed his thighs raw as regret. His hands shook, and he let them shake. He needed them whole, not proud. Skahaz had not moved. He looked unamused, and in his eyes was a small bright thing that might have been hope. Barristan's mouth had softened around the corners. Garrus clapped his hands like a boy who had managed to snatch a fruit without being seen, and now could eat it even if his mother found him. Archibald made a noise that was almost laughter, and almost a sob. The leatherworkers behind them were all at once 10 years younger, the way people are when they see that a thing they have made helped a man live. In the East, Skahaz said, in the voice of a judge who had decided to let himself be pleased for exactly 2 breaths, "The engines are quiet." "Until new rope," Barristan said, not to ruin it, only because truth was his habit, and he did not know how to break it. "We will go again." "We will," Quentyn said. He could feel the day beginning, the sky making the first pale version of blue like a clerk who arrives early and lays out his pens with tidy care. But not in sun. He does not love the heat on his wings. Not many do. Skahaz said dryly, which made Quentyn wonder how much the man had known of dragons in books before he had the luck to meet one in his city. "We will spend the day making the men who hate you argue with the men who fear you and the ones who want to use you. They will all say your name, some will learn to pronounce it. Most will call me something that means frog, Quentyn said. I know how to answer to that too. Skahaz's eyes flicked. Good, he said. It is a city of names that are meant to bring men to heel. If you can bear a name and not be bent by it, you may walk farther here than most. Damn. They did not celebrate. Meereen had forgotten how. What they did instead was the work cities do when something like a miracle has not made them whole. They argued, they planned, they counted grains of food and drops of oil and bricks for repairs and men who could stand in the sun without fainting. Skahaz held 2 councils at once, the one at the table with Barristan and Quentyn, and the one that moved in his head as his men came and went with whispers and masks that tilted and did not tilt. Quentyn watched and understood why the queen had kept such a man near, and why she had wanted to throw him from a high place and watch his mask crack into 4 pieces on the stone. In the second hour, a priest in a red scarf came and lay a finger as light as breath upon Garrus' blister. The pain went out of it as if it had been called by name and told to leave. The priest smelt of smoke and cinnamon and the sea's metal breath. His eyes were old and soft in a way that would make a man confess without being asked. Your friend carries heat too close to his bones, the priest said, nodding at Quentyn without asking what he had just done. That is good, if he knows that when he sleeps it tries to go deeper. I will not sleep, Quentyn said, and Garrus rolled his eyes so delicately that only Arch saw and only Arch snorted. Sleep, the priest said gently, and moved on without waiting to be obeyed. The day lengthened. It acquired noises of its own, 1,000 of them that made a net. Quentyn stood and sat and stood again. He ate dates that stuck to his teeth and salted goat that tasted of the goat's own stubbornness. He drank water that had been praised and prayed over, and found it healthier than the wine that had come through 3 sets of hands and 2 sets of mouths. He went out twice to let Viserion stretch his wings in the hot air. Short glides that ended in dust, that lay down obediently when the dragon told it to. Children near the court's edge reached out brave fingers to touch a scale, and then ran away shrieking with laughter because they had dared the world, and it had not bitten them. An old woman in a doorway spat and made a sign against the dark. A younger woman pulled her hand down gently. By afternoon, men came with news from the camps. 1 engine full of char, 1 arm bent like an old man's, 1 rope that had snapped into 5 and whipped 3 men half to death. A commander of the long lances had lost his courage and his teeth in the same quarter hour. A priest of Yunkai had called upon 3 gods, and 2 had not come. The 3rd had come and eaten the priest's hat. An elephant had drunk wine and lay down in the wrong place, and would not be wakened for love or lashes. Quentyn sat and listened. He made himself remember every detail, as if each were a bead on a string he would need to account for later when the gods demanded the tally. In the evening, Skahaz allowed himself a half smile. We will go again tonight, he said, as if granting a holiday to a child who had earned it. Not the same engines. Another set. And we will send whispers into the camps that the white dragon goes first for those who have insulted him. They will all discover they have done so. Nay. Barristan rubbed the bridge of his nose with a finger as if he could erase the frown there. I will send word along the wall, he said, and I will set men to watch for the sons. He did not need to say of the harpy. The brazen beast's masks around him made the absence of those other masks eloquent. There will be knives tonight for men who walk in strange company. They will have to climb fast to catch him. Skahaz said, meaning Quentyn, meaning the dragon, meaning the future. He turned to Quentyn. There is one more thing. Rhaegal. Quentyn's back went tight. He had not let himself think of the Green One during the day, except in negative. The way a man trying to learn to live with pain learns to walk around the places that make him cry out. Not tonight, he said carefully. Skahaz spread his hands. Not tonight, he agreed easily, which made Quentyn notice the trap he had expected and did not find. But soon. The city will not be able to hold you upon the terrace like a jewel in a box, while the Green One remains under the pyramid making smoke. He is a threat we cannot weigh or spend. He did not add, or you will be accused of keeping him as a private danger to pull out when your own needs require it. He did not need to. "I will try," Quentyn said. "When I can bring to him what I brought to his brother." He did not know yet what that was. He suspected it had less to do with blood than with the manner in which he had offered it. That night, the light was different. It had taken him all day to learn the taste of Meereen's dark, to separate the city's exhausted night from the war's hungry one. Now he could tell which shadows hid men and which hid nothing. He could hear a child sleep from a thief's. They went out over the lower river, where the reed beds made a whisper that men have used since reeds were made to tell secrets and lies and love. The dragon's wings beat the water into plates. Fish scattered. A heron lifted one leg as if to pray, and then decided running was more pious. They struck at engines farther from the walls, where the Yunkai commanders felt safest, because they were laziest and the men under them had given their labor to sand all day and had no more anger left to spend. Quentyn made Viserion's breath into a thin finger rather than a broad hand. He learned that it could be done. He learned he could mistake the breath and make a killing of men who had only wanted to break bread and not skulls before dawn. He learned how a set of ropes, not yet under full load, turned to smoke with a little longer breath and made the entire engine sulk and collapse. He learned his own limits, his legs shaking not from fear but the strain of clamping on, his back complaining where the straps bit, his eyes watering in the flat cold of their height, and then burning when heat came back at him off some soaked canvas or a man's spear tip. Arrows again, slingstones humming. Once a bolt from a too quickly made scorpion sang up and went past the dragon's tail with a sound like a plucked harp string. Quentyn's mind made a note without panic. Make them waste bolts on things that are not us. He found a line of tents whose owners had a cock's understanding of their own importance and had set a string of little fires before their doors as offerings to their own vanity. He breathed, and those fires leapt and joined hands and became a hand that slapped at the front of the biggest tent. Men poured from it the way unstoppered jars pour, one with a braided beard silvered with pride, another carrying a ledger wrapped in oilcloth, as if the numbers would protect him from flame. The dragon rose, and the camp behind them tried to become a beast with many arms, and failed. Quentyn tasted salt and hated himself for it. He took what that hatred gave him and used it to judge the next engine better and leave the tent rows alone. They did not escape unmarked. An arrow grazed Viserion's wing. It did not pierce a membrane that looked like oiled parchment, but was stronger than boiled leather. It scratched, and to scratch a dragon is to cut pride. Viserion flared his wings and roared, the first true roar of the night, a sound that flattened the air and the hearts in it. Quentyn's head rang. He clung and stroked and spoke without hearing himself, and the dragon folded the anger like a cloak thrown upon a bed and moved on. The scratch bled a little and then bled no more. Later, in the court, Quentyn would wash it with wine, and the dragon would endure the indignity and then turn his head and blow upon Quentyn's hair with deliberate kindness and push him with his muzzle until he took a step away from the fragile, ridiculous wound. They came home before dawn again, and the city had the same astonished air it had worn the night before, and some of the men who had been loud about breakfast were quieter. Skahas permitted himself a smile that made him look very much like a boy who had stolen something he had wanted and discovered it tasted good. Barristan looked older, not younger. He carried rest with him like a burden he did not intend to set down until he was somewhere safe enough to let his knees go briefly soft. Garrus sang something vulgar under his breath, and Arch grunted on the offbeats like a man who has learned to enjoy being unmoved. On the third day, the slavers adapted. Men who have been twice surprised teach themselves caution, and fear's apprenticeship is short. The engines were ringed with raw hides soaked in river water, ugly curtains that hissed and smoked and made the flames turn slow and petulant. The ropes were kept under wet cloths. Men with hand-gongs stood like herons upon old ox carts ready to beat them when the white shape came out of the cloud. Quentyn did not show them the same approach, not because he feared them, but because boredom would have been worse than pain. He stole along the camp's edge and found the rubbish middens and breathed into them until they stank and smoked and sent false warnings upriver. He burned pickets tied in bundles where they would be needed in 2 days, and turned them to charcoal that would smudge men's hands who touched them and put shame there to make their tempers quick. He He found the tents of the men who counted coin, and made the banners outside their doors singe. He did not kill boys. He killed 2 men with clever eyes and soft hands whose deaths would make their neighbors work too much and too late, and he regretted them less than the man crushed under a falling beam who had turned toward the sound of bells and turned his back to the sound of wings. Meereen began to speak in a new voice. The old words, harpy, yunkai, queen, plague, tasted of ashes. New ones came. Dragon, prince, dawn, fire that knew when to stop. There were men who did not like the new words because they had grown fat on the old. There were women who taught their children to say them and warned the children not to say them when the wrong uncles came to visit. The brazen beasts began to appear in markets with a casualness that was not casual at all. Their masks a reminder that there were faces behind them who had chosen sharpness instead of softness. The unsullied did not choose. They stood or marched or slept as ordered, and the city took their presence into its bones again, as it had when the queen had walked among them, and made promises this hot place had not heard in 300 years. On the 4th day, Skahaz brought news that had the taste of copper in it. The Yunkai have sent to Myre for more rope, and to New Gis for men who know how to make engines sing, and to Volantis for merchants, with mouths as wide as the rivers. He said it calmly, as if reciting a prayer. They have sent for priests. We shall soon have more gods outside our walls than inside. Nendarsal. And we, Barristan said, have one we have not yet learned to worship properly. He did not look at the dragon. He looked at Quentyn, and in his gaze was not need exactly, nor command. It was apology. I must ask more of you than tiring a creature, not meant to be tired by men. Quentyn waited. He had learned that when Barristan said I must ask more, the old man would ask it in a way that left a man free to refuse, and forever obliged if he did not. The Yunkai have men in the city, Barristan went on. Some are agents, and some are fools, and some are men who do not know what they have been paid to do. The sons will find them, and will ask them questions with knives that will give the wrong answers, if any answers at all. I would prefer to lay my hand upon the right men before Skahaz's do. He glanced at Skahaz, who smiled and shrugged because he had no shame about the things he had to do, and that honesty made him easier to admire than men who had only half the stomach and hid the other. If we move openly with soldiers, the men we want will go to ground, and perhaps under it. If you and your dragon were to fly low along the street of Giscari princes at noon, the crowd would do what crowds do. Men who long to see will show themselves. Men who fear their own remembering of what they said in wine will show themselves running the other way. We might set nets where they will not see them. Thou. Quentyn did not like it. He had not come to be a fairgrounds monster and a trap for people whose sins could not be weighed without learning their wives' names. He had also not come to pretend that he had choices like a cleric's in a white room when the world outside was brown with grief. I will do it, he said, but not at noon. He thought of the heat, the way Viserion's breath became thin when it had to fight the sun. An hour before, when the market is full and not yet mad. Skahaz nodded. I will move my men, he said, the way a man says I will pour water where you tell me. And that made Quentyn glance at him sidelong. It was not trust. It felt like respect in a language that both could speak with their eyes and not betray it in front of others. They did it. Viserion's white flooded the street of princes like an omen. Men cried out, and women laughed with fear and delight mixed, and then pulled their children back, because they had grown used to reflexes that kept them alive. The dragon's head swung from side to side with the detached attention of a creature that eats meat and does not care which cow it came from. Quentyn looked where he was meant to look. Doors that slammed too late. Faces that turned the wrong way. One man whose scarf fell and showed a tattoo at his throat like the mark of some foreign god. The brazen beasts marked them. Later the city would groan a little, as Skahaz's men tugged upon nets in alleys that smelled of cumin and old fish. For now Quentyn let men point and call to him, and did not hear the words, because what he heard instead was the thin mew of envy in the eye of one boy on a step, a city boy who had never seen a horse run, let alone a dragon, and had taught himself not to want anything, because everything wanted here got taken. He looked at the boy and saw himself in a mirror, turned to make him a little thinner, a little darker, a little slyer. He raised his hand, and the boy raised his, and for a breath the city was as simple as that. They returned to the pyramid, with the smell of spices in their clothes, and the echo of 1,000 voices, following them like a tide. Garrus remained swooning. Arch pretended to catch him and rolled his eyes when Garrus did not really fall. The way a man does when he has decided to tolerate a friend's silliness as a tax on his own patience. Barristan wiped his brow and said perhaps he was not as young as he had been, and Skahaz made a sound that meant not one of us is. It could not hold. The war's loins were not slack hands. They were hands that liked the work and grew better at it under practice. On the 6th day, the horns on the river spoke a new note. It came not from the Yunkai shore, but from the seaward side, from out beyond the curve of the bay, where ships became gleams, and then dreams, and then fears. It had a brazen sound to it, a brag in it, and an old grief. Men on the wall looked at one another because they had heard that note in childhood stories told by grandfathers whose hands had knots, where ropes had tried to turn them into something else. It was a sound from the west, not the east. The long, low belling of iron. The Ironborn, Barristan said softly. Not like a confession and not like a surprise. He might as well have said winter or taxes. They have come as they said they would. Skahaz hissed through his teeth, not in fear, in the way a cook hisses when a pot boils over at the wrong moment. More gods, he said. These ones have drowned their own and ask us to admire the trick. The horn spoke again. The ships came with their high prows and their loveless black sails, their oars beating the water in a rhythm that had nothing to do with this place, but had come from a far sea, and would leave its footprint here the way a passing giant does when he steps in wet clay. Quentyn felt Viserion's skin prick. The dragon's head lifted. His eye narrowed to brightness. He tasted the wind as if it had turned to meat. Between the iron ships moved a red shape, like a coal that kept finding new breath. On its prow was a man with a beard that had been cut by an honest knife and eyes that had seen too much, and then learned to love seeing too much. Beside him stood a dark priest with his hair long and his smile like a child's, when he has discovered Flame's trick and wants to show everyone. Quentyn did not know Victorian Greyjoy by sight, but some men carry their names with them like a cloak, and this one looked as if his had been woven of iron filings and salt. On the deck of one of the ships, Quentyn could not tell which, men bore a horn as long as 2 men are tall. It had been banded with black metal, the way a warlord's arm might be, engraved with shapes that moved if you looked at them too fixedly, lines eaten into them by tools that were glad to make wounds. He felt rather than heard what the thing would say if told to speak. He put his hand of its own accord upon Viserion's neck, and felt the dragon's muscle tense the way a horse's does when he hears lightning on stone though the sky is clear. They will blow it, Skahaz said, as if he were remarking upon a man who had brought a sword to a feast and would insist upon cutting the meat with it, though there were knives nearer. Because they cannot not. Barristan's mouth went thin. His hand went to his sword hilt without drawing it. We should not be here if they do, he said quietly. We should be as far from this stone as we can be, or else under it. The wall will carry that sound and pour it into these rooms until we drown. What is it? Garrus asked. The boy bravado was gone. This was a man's question asked by a man who would not run merely because he did not like the taste of a thing. A horn made to call dragons, Barristan said, or to break them. He did not look at the dragon because he loved the dragon too quickly and did not wish to be seen doing so. I heard the one they blew in the king's hall once, long ago, when I was younger and prettier, and thought a great deal of things that no longer matter. This one is worse. The metal is wrong. The smell is wrong. The men holding it look as if they have had their teeth taken out and replaced with someone else. Skahaz laughed softly. So we will greet them properly, he said, with silence. Prince, go up with your dragon. Not far. Far enough that if the horn calls, he knows you are here, and knows you do not mean to be hauled like a fish. When the sound comes, if it comes, do not be brave. Be clever. Move away. Do not fight the sound. Let it go through you. I have never blown such a horn, but I have blown other ones. And men who fight noise discover their own bones are instruments. Now, Quentyn did not pretend to know. He did not pretend to be unafraid. He led Viserion up the steps in a hurry that was careful, a speed that cheated, gliding where the dragon had already learned the rhythm of the stone. They gained the ledge and the open. The wind brought the iron smell and the chant of men rowing. The bay was a mirror with old blood on it. The horn lifted. Men braced. Mokoro, if that was the priest's name, smiled like a new knife. The first blast drilled the world. It did not blow as men's horns do, wide and generous and delighted with the sound they send into dawn. It stabbed. It did not make a note. It found one that had already been waiting in the marrow of things and pushed upon it until everything there began to cry. Quentyn felt his teeth hurt, a pain so clean it felt like being licked by ice. He tasted copper and salt. The harness creaked like an old door someone insisted on keeping. He put both hands upon Viserion's neck and felt the dragon's body knot as if hands had seized it. Viserion screamed. He had not heard that sound before. It was not anger. It was not pleasure. It was not even fear. It was a sound made by something proud being humiliated by being told it belonged. Quentyn's heart tore a little at the edges. He did not try to soothe in words. He did not try to master. He took his hands away from the hide as if to say, "I do not own you," and then put them back as if to say, "But I am here." The horn's sound did not stop. It shifted. It found a cousin. It pressed there. Quentyn's gut turned. His knees tried to come up under him in an old child's trick to make himself smaller and safe. The harness refused. He forced his jaw to loosen. Men break their own teeth at such times. His mind told him calmly, as if it were writing a letter, and breathed out through his mouth and imagined himself water. Viserion trembled. The dragon's wings lifted of their own accord, half unfolded, as if something inside him responded to a wind not in the world. His tail lashed and cut a shallow channel in the stone. His eye rolled white as bone. Quentyn spoke then, because he had nothing else to do. He said his name as if it were a tune, not a name. He said the names of places he had loved. Sunspear, the water gardens, Vaith, a small wadi they had camped by once, when he and Arianne and their cousins had been too young to be careful, and had made a feast from figs and stolen wine. He said his father's name, and his mother's, and the queen's. He said the word Nymeria, as men in Dorne say it when they are alone, and do not fear being mocked for the catch in their throat. He made of the words a rope that had no end, and when he had made it, he held onto it, and did not pretend it was stronger than it was. The horn blew. The rope held him. Viserion shuddered, and the shudder went through Quentyn and out into the air and away. Below, in the bay, a man staggered. It was not the man holding the horn. It was one of the ones standing near with hopes turned to fear. He fell to his knees and vomited in a way that made other men step away from him, and from their own bodies. The horn took breath and blew again, and this time the note went higher, and it picked at a place behind Quentyn's eyes, where a man's thoughts become not thoughts. He closed his eyes then because it was the only thing to do that felt like a choice. He saw light that was not the world's, a shivering white like fish bellies turned in a net. He opened his eyes again because a man who keeps them closed too long becomes a child. Viserion moved. It was not for flight. It was not to run. He raised his head as if he were in a strange stable and someone had tapped a bucket with a stick, a sound which promised salt and fat. He took one step. Quentyn swallowed and did not tighten his thighs. He loosened them. He let the step be taken as if he were not there. The dragon took another. The harness sang a small complaining note. Quentyn stroked the hide with a touch so light it flattered itself to be called human. The dragon stopped. The way a cat stops, not because a man has said stop, but because the cat has discovered that stopping serves his own ends. The horn blew and ran out of breath like a man who has tried to argue with the sea. The silence afterward was filthy with men. Quentyn did not know he had been crying until the wind found his cheeks and the salt there opened and stung and told him he had been busy with something other than dignity. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, a boy's rude gesture, and laughed once without mirth. His breath shook. He forced it to do so more gently. He bent and put his forehead upon Viserion's neck. The hide was hot and dry. The smell there had changed. It woke memories of burned pennyroyal and summer walls. The dragon breathed out, and the breath was hot, and had no intention in it. He had endured a thing, and would later show that endurance in some small insult to lesser creatures. For now, he was merely alive. Enough, Quentyn said to no one. Down in the bay, the men with the horn were bent like reeds. A priest had fallen and could not rise because his robe tangled his legs, and he had decorated it with chains in his vanity. The giant man on the prow, Viserion or someone exactly like him, stood with his jaw set as if he had decided not to have feelings and his body would oblige. The iron ships moved out and in among the slavers' ships like knives in cloth. Quentyn could not tell yet whether they had come to fight for Meereen or only to fight. He did not much care. The horn spell had been for dragons, not for men, and the dragon had not gone. They took the stairs down with care because care felt like Pride's specific brother. In the court below, men spoke of the sound reverently and disgustedly, and with bravado that would leak later when they were alone. Skahaz had one hand flat on the table, as if the stone had lifted under him, and he had steadied it with a casual godliness. Barristan's lips were bloodless, and he had bitten one to remind himself he was in a body. Not some old tale he had already read badly once. "You stayed," Skahaz said, and the way he said it made the word not praise nor question, but relief spoken like a man who takes his first breath after the head has been under. "We stayed," Quentyn said, and reached for the cup that was not wine and drank as if it were. The water had the copper taste of pipes and old stone, and the hands of men who had carried it. It was the best thing he had ever put in his mouth. "It will blow again," Barristan said. "They will not be content with one. And now they have learned they can blow and not die. Men are brave that way. Then we will teach them something else." Skahaz murmured, "We will show them the cost of blowing." He rubbed his chin and considered the bay, as if it were a board on which he had placed not stones, but kernels of hot corn, and the little pops of sound they made would tell him where the heat lay. "When they blow again, we move along the wall with our archers and our best spear throwers and put iron in the men around the horn, not in the horn itself. There is mischief in striking a god's instrument, but in the men who ask it to sing. Bam! They are far," Barristan pointed out. "We are not all tall as gods. We are thieves." Skahaz said, "We will steal a closer place." He did not explain. He did not need to. He went on. "The Iron Men will fight the slavers because fighting is their language, and they do not have another. We will let them speak it. When they have shouted themselves hoarse, we will whisper in the ears of the Sellswords who are wise enough to know the side with food tastes better than the side without. The wind blown, for one." "No." Quentyn straightened. "Leave the wind blown to me," he said. He had promised. He had promised a city he could not yet give, and a future he could not yet mint. And the tattered prince had taken this promise as men take salt with a meal, as a thing that makes other things possible. Tattered prince will not forgive a slight, but he will forgive a man who makes his word good. Skahaz's eyes amused themselves with the thought of men forgiving when they wanted things. "Good," he said. "Then it will be your shoulders that ache under that particular pack." He lifted a hand and dropped it. "When can you go to their camp?" "In daylight," Quentyn said. "I will go as soon as Viserion has had meat, and I have had fewer thoughts." He looked to Barristan. "Will you send a man with me with a white banner that can be seen before all others? If they shoot me under truce, at least they will have to pretend they didn't." "Now, I have a banner," Barristan said, "and a man who knows how to carry it so it does not catch on his pride." He looked at Quentyn carefully. "Do not go alone." "I never do," Quentyn said, and Garrison Arch obliged him by looking offended that he had even thought to speak a thing so obvious. They fed the dragon within the hour. Viserion took a bullock and a half with good grace and the second half without. He then went to the far side of the court and lay in a stripe of shadow and considered the world as if its more tedious parts offended him only slightly. Quentyn washed, perfunctory, the way a man does when he must cross from one skin to another in a hurry, and cannot afford to remember that he would like to be clean in truth. He buckled on a vest of boiled leather that would stop a knife if the knife were not too determined. He set his father's ring upon his thumb rather than the old finger. The old wound across his palm itched where the heat had drawn it tighter. He kissed the place without thinking, and hated himself for the superstition, and did it again anyway because men are made of such contradictions, and live longer when they accept them. They took 3: Quentyn, Garrus, Arch. The banner-bearer was a young man from the river, with eyes that belonged to an older person, and the careful precision of an orphan in the way he tied the cloth to the pole. He held the pole as if it were a spear, and he were trying to convince himself not to use it as one. They walked out the eastern gate under a sky that held its breath. The camp that had been an enemy's body became, as they approached, a geography. Mounds, trenches, the flood of shadows under carts and the stiff curtains of oiled cloth in doorways, where the rich kept their breezes trained. The windblown were camped a little apart, as men do who want to be asked to every party but reserve the right to leave if the wine is poor. Their banners were as pragmatic as their captain. A ragged flag with stitches that showed because they were meant to be seen by men who would admire the craft. A woman with a hairline scar along her jaw. Pretty Maris watched them come with her hand to her sword, and her other hand to her mouth, to hide a smile that might not be kind. Behind her, men looked up with the heavy-lidded interest of gamblers who hear a new rule being explained in the middle of a hand. "Tattered prince," Quentyn called, and Pretty Maris lifted her chin and turned halfway, and a man walked out of the tent as if the tent were a stage, and he had been waiting his cue. He wore his name not as a joke, but as the best description. Handsome in a way that had survived weather, seams showing. He looked at the banner first because he was wise, and then at Quentyn, and then past Quentyn to where beyond the city, the white thing lay on the pyramid like a spilled bowl of milk. He smiled without teeth. "Prince," he said, "I have your city in my pocket." "You have my promise in it," Quentyn said. He closed the distance until Pretty Maris' fingers loosened on her hilt, because he had not made her move to prevent indelicacy. "I have made good with other men," he went on. "I would make good with you." The tattered prince tilted his head the way a man does who has spent years among men who lie well, and learns to tell by the way a thin vein moves in the liar's temple, whether the lie is worth being polite about. "You cannot give me Pentos," he said without heat. "I can set men and time toward it," Quentyn said, not pretending to be more than he was. "I can plant the thought where it will grow and water it. I can make enemies of your enemies. I can put your name in rooms where it has not yet been spoken, except as a warning. I can bring you maps and men who draw them well. I can bring you dragons that make some oaths very light to carry." The tattered prince did not look at the dragon again. He had the courage to leave that glance to lesser men. He regarded Quentyn as if he were weighing 2 versions of the same grain and deciding which would sprout in a poorer soil. "And if you die," he said pleasantly, "I will have nothing but smoke and the memory of a Dornish boy who still believed that putting one word after another could make them true." "If I die," Quentyn said, "you will have a debt against a house that pays its debts with interest, because we remember how dear it is not to." He thought of the water gardens and the way his father had spoken of the cost of the children there, even when they were laughing with figs in their hands. "You will have a prince's sister who knows how to make men love her, and she will say your name in a way that will shame merchants into keeping their word." Pretty Maris made a small noise that might have been contempt at the idea of merchants' shame. The tattered prince lifted a hand and it ceased, which made Quentyn like him against his better sense. "We betray the Yunkai at our own choosing," the tattered prince said mildly. "Not yours. But it would be a pity if our choice and yours did not happen to coincide." "It would," Quentyn agreed. "Choose a morning soon." He did not press. He could feel the other man's love of his own freedom, like a heat coming from him. He did not crowd it. The tattered prince considered. "The Iron Men will help us choose," he said. "They have a way of stepping on the board that breaks pieces that were never meant to have their legs tested. Go back to your city, Prince. Burn a few more engines, so the men who hate you will be too busy collecting ropes to collect thoughts. When I lift my banner and show its wrong side to the slavers, it will be at a time when the wind will reward courage and punish accounting. And now, Pretty Maris glanced between them and found herself out of a job for the first time in a week. She grinned, which made the scar jump. "Try not to die before we get our fun," she advised Quentyn, not unkindly. "I have had too many men promise me bright things and then trip over the doorstep." "I am careful with doorsteps," Quentyn said. "Dorne is a house with too many." He inclined his head to the tattered prince. "I will send word, or I will send a dragon." "Send a man," the tattered prince said, mouth curling. "I have not yet learned to eat dragons." They parted with the courtesy of men who will soon betray someone else, and would rather not waste scorn upon each other. On the way back into the city, Garrus laughed under his breath, and then winced, because laughter pulled at the healing skin. "You just promised 3 futures," he said. "I am pleased. Watching you out, promise the men who went to Essos with black hair and came back with none will be entertaining." "None?" "I promised 1, Quentyn said. "The other 2 are the same one, seen at different hours." "You have been spending time with the Shavapate," Arch observed. "Your words wear clever masks now." Quentyn shrugged. "If they do, I trust you to pull them off when you think I look too fine." During the next 2 nights, they moved and burned, and did not gorge themselves with victory. Viserion learned to love the height that kept crossbows dishonest and ballistae ungenerous. Quentyn learned how to lean not at all, and then all at once. He learned the place at the base of a wing where pressure made the creature decide to climb without argument. He learned the difference between the dragon's anger at being surprised and his anger at being slighted, a difference a man should learn if he wished to keep his limbs. He learned to laugh into the wind and keep his mouth closed when flies, maddened by lamplight, rose in a cloud like a poor man's curse. He did not go to Rhaegal. Each dawn he told himself this would be the day he tried, and each evening the green breath from the pyramid's depths found him as he lay with his head turned, and reminded him that if he went too soon, he would come back with parts of himself fewer. Skahaz did not press. Barristan did not raise an eyebrow. The fact that neither did told Quentyn how clearly his weakness showed on his face. He drew courage from that, because a weakness a man can see is at least not one that trips him from behind. On the 8th morning, the bay changed its mind. The iron ships threw grapnels into the slavers' cogs and dragged them about like toys for bored children. The slavers put out fires with sand until they ran out of sand, and then with their robes until they ran out of robes. The horn blew again. It did not strike so deep this time. Viserion's disdain had grown a thin callus that protected him without making him foolish. The men around the horn had iron in them from Meereen's walls, little bites that made the blowing ragged, as if the instrument had developed asthma. Quentyn imagined the archer who had put one arrow into the blower's upper arm and another into the belly of a man standing behind him, a man who had not believed in arrows until he died. He felt a loyalty to that anonymous bow that surprised him with its hotness. The tattered prince's flag turned. It was a small thing, the sort of change that makes no noise and can be denied later if needed by men who prefer their lies seasoned with truth. It turned, and the few who saw it began to behave as if their feet had always wanted to turn with it. The windblown moved like men who had remembered their own hunger and set down other men's bread. They fell upon the flank of a company from Cahor that had been more thoughtful in its prayer than its pickets. The Cahoric fought well because their habits were good. They died well because their leader understood theater. The slavers' line shivered as a rope shivers when a load is shifted without warning, and the iron men on the water shouted and beat their oars with sudden kindness upon the sea. The engines along the landward side tried to turn to meet a threat that came from within their circle. They creaked and complained. Men forgot to wet the ropes. Ropes burned. Once a carcass packed with dried dung and misery and shaped by clumsy hands to make plague flew and landed not in Meereen, but in the slavers' own camp, and men scattered from it like beetles from light. Quentyn did not direct a battle because he was not a general. He did not set pieces upon a board. He chose 3 places where men looked as if they would do something brave and ugly, and he gave them a reason to do it better. He burned a gap in a hedge of stakes that a group of skirmishers had been hesitating before, and then took his dragon up, so the men running through would not be roasted like rabbits. He breathed upon the front of a line of elephants enough to make their handlers spend all their attention upon their mounts, not upon stabbing men before them. He scorched a banner whose color had frightened some of Marine's levies, and watched their shoulders straighten when the banner looked ridiculous. He did not kill boys. He killed 2 men who stood so calmly under the slavers' high standard that he hated them for their serenity. At noon the heat crawled under armor and into eyes. Men stepped backward, not because they feared, but because their bodies had discovered that they were animals, and animals do not argue with noon. Viserion's breath shortened. His flanks moved faster. Quentyn pressed his cheek to hide and felt the labor there, and pulled the dragon away from the place where a part of himself would have been glad to burn all day just to watch the shapes men's shadows make when they try to run and cannot. He took him high enough that the air cooled, and they glided back toward the pyramid where stone promised shade that was not relief, but was not insult either. The city watched them come, as if the sun itself had dipped and risen again on a whim. Bells rang, not all in agreement. The great pyramid's court had a shadow in it that looked like a map of the river. Skahaz stood with his head uncovered, and his scars showing, as if that were his crown. Barristan had blood on his sleeve that was not his. Gareth sprawled on the step with his legs extended and his arms thrown over his head, exactly as he had laid himself out to doze when they were boys, and had stolen a wineskin. He had always slept like a man trying to look like a martyr, in a story who knows the storyteller does not love him. Arch sat beside him and flicked water from the fountain at his face, patiently, until Gareth swore and sat up and pretended to be ready to fight again. "We hold?" Quentyn asked. For in battle, a man asks the simple question first, because it tells everything else which words to put on their boots. "We hold," Skahaz said. "We do better than that. We make them ashamed." His smile showed none of his teeth. "They will act tonight as men do when shame is hot under their fingernails. They will make mistakes. We will let them." Barristan nodded once, weary without saying so. "The Iron Men are generous with their blood when they think it will buy a story to tell later," he said. "We will collect their stories and spend them. Prince, you have been a blade today and not a hammer. Good. Hammers make men hard. Blades make them fall. And now..." Quentyn slid down from the saddle and put his hands upon his knees and breathed until his legs stopped thinking for themselves. He went to Viserion's scratch along the wing and washed it again, and spoke nonsense under his breath, because the words are for men, not beasts, and the beast hears tone, not content. The dragon endured, and then, as before, blew upon Quentyn's hair and nudged him backward a step as if to say, "You fuss too much." Quentyn smiled at it, a private thing he did not let Skahaz see. He scratched the base of a spine the way you would rub a hound's ear if the hound were the size of a kitchen. That evening, as the light went old and beer stale, a woman came to the court with a cloak over her head that had once been green, and now was the color of honest dirt. She kept her eyes on the ground until she raised them, and showed herself as the green Grace, Marine's mother, who had once draped her arms about the queen like vines upon a young tree. Skahaz's face did something ugly, and then something elegant. He schooled it from hate to courtesy, with emotion that might have been a flinch and might have been a bow. "Gracious," he said. "What a busy day. It is not usual to see you here without a procession to prove you are not afraid." "Menso, I am old," the green Grace said, and her voice had the kind of iron in it that old women in every city of the world carry when the boys are fighting nearby and the milk must not be allowed to curdle. "I do not have time to be afraid. Prince, Dutcott." She turned to Quentyn and looked upon him the way a mother looks upon a man who has married her daughter and finds that he is not entirely to be trusted, but not entirely to be despised. "You have made yourself necessary." "I would rather be useful," Quentyn said. "Useful men are necessary while they are useful," she said. "Necessary men become monsters when they forget they were once merely useful." She did not smile. "A small counsel for a young man: never believe the name necessary when it is applied to you by other men. It is a title given by those who wish to keep their own hands clean." Skahaz made a polite noise. "Gracious, we have battles to plan. Will you bless us with a prayer, so that the gods will attend to you, instead of to us." "Nah. I will bless the city," she said. "I will bless any boy who remembers to bring his mother water, and any captain who keeps his men from raping, and red-handed gods who forget for a breath that they are gods and behave as if they had been human once." She lifted a hand and made a sign in the air that might have been superstition, and might have been arithmetic. "And I bless foolish princes who bring dragons into rooms, and do not burn the furniture." Her eyes twinkled once. It was alarming. Quentyn bowed more deeply than he had to because something in him liked to be liked by old women who had learned what bodies cost. The green grace tipped her head to Viserion. The dragon blinked, not slow, not fast, politely. "He is handsome," she said to Quentyn. "Do not fall in love with him in the way men do with women they cannot understand. Fall in love with what he allows you to do for others, and then you may survive the part where he does not need you." "I will try," Quentyn said, and meant it in the way men do when they are given advice that feels like a loaf of bread that will be stale tomorrow, and still good to eat. Night spread its ink and wrote men's names upon it, and then licked the page to see if they tasted right. The iron ships and the slavers fought the kind of fight on water that looks like embraces from a distance and reveals itself as murder up close. On land, sellswords changed their minds again because their wives had said their names in their sleep, and the names had not sounded proud. The windblown did not change back, because the tattered prince had decided he liked the taste of this treachery and would keep it in his mouth a while. The horn blew once more, weakly, like a man after an illness trying to bed a woman, and finding he has only the memory of his skill. It found no purchase now. Viserion lifted his head in contempt that would become arrogance if Quentyn did not keep it from doing so. Quentyn did not fly. He stood on the pyramid and watched men set fires they did not intend to put out, and then learned, in a hurry, what happens when you give fire leave. Dawn came and showed the shapes of men's work. There were new black bites in the camps where engines had been. The ground where 100 tents had been now showed the pale scabs of disturbed soil. The river took 100 dead, and gave back 3 who coughed and cursed, and threw up their bargains with the gods onto the stones, and went back to their captains because men are obedient, even when they have just been spared by a river's joke. Meereen had lost 50 men, and Quentyn forced himself to read their names off the list Skaha's clerk brought. To memorize 3, the way his father had taught him. Always remember 3 whose families you will have to face, and not look down when you do. He took the paper and put it in his jerkin. He would read it again where no one would see him cry. After noon he went to the dragon pit again. He had sworn he would not go alone. He brought Garrus, Arch, 2 unsullied with faces that revealed nothing, and eyes that revealed everything, and a leather worker who had laughed at his first harness, and then had made him another better one. "You are mad," Garrus informed him, friendly. "But we are men who do not envy you until after you have done the thing and lived." Arch took down a jar of oil and a bag with meat and a coil of new rope, and said nothing, which was the most eloquent thing anyone said all day. The heat below had a different taste. Viserion had been living his heat in air. Rhaegal had brooded upon his, turning it over and over in the bowl of his chest, like a miser with coins in an earthen pot. The green breath came and made the torch's flames flatten. The green eyes opened and were gold too, like Viserion's, but a different gold, one that had lived in marsh water and learned tricks there. Quentyn stood with blood wet upon his palm again because some old logic insisted that a thing had been done one way and must be done that way again, even if the logic was only a man's way of flattering his fear by making it look like ritual. "Brother," he said softly, because the dragon would not understand the word, but tone lives under language. "We are not enemies," Rhaegal's chain murmured. He moved, not much, but enough that the iron remembered its own weight and complained the way bones do at weather. Garrus came a pace nearer, and then stopped, because stopping is as brave as stepping if you do it for the right reasons. Arch set the jar down very carefully and did not take his eyes off the green. The Unsullied did not shift. Quentyn took 1 step only. He was not the boy he had been 2 weeks ago. He did not want to die for a gesture that would be sung and forgotten. He wanted to live and go home and die later in a bed with his sister's children fussing over his covers, and his father shaking his head at him one last time. He held his open palm not because dragons love blood. They do not. They love heat and power. But because the gesture was for him. He felt foolish. He let himself feel it. He held steady. Rhaegal's head lowered. It did not come with the careful courtesy Viserion had given when he decided not to be insulted. It fell, the way a boulder falls that had been held too long by a thin root and the patience of earth. It struck the floor a pace from Quentyn, and the impact rang up through his calves and into his teeth. The green tongue flicked out and did not touch his hand. The breath washed him and was not killing. The eye stared and did not narrow. Quentyn stood and did not blink until tears made him, and then he blinked and was angry with himself for the tears, and then forgave himself the anger, because men can do more than one hard thing in the same minute. He did not move closer. He did not reach. He said his name, and then said another man's. Rhaegar, because the sound was near and the dragon might like it the way cats like a voice that sounds like a can being opened, even if they do not know what a can is. Rhaegal's earful twitched. He moved his head side to side and the chain scraped, and the sound made the Unsullied's knuckles go white upon their spears. The green tongue flicked again, and this time caught the smallest drop of blood that had beaded again upon Quentyn's palm in the way old cuts do when they are asked a question. The tongue withdrew. The dragon's eye narrowed. He did not blink. He allowed the man not to die. Enough, Arch said quietly, at exactly the right moment, the way men who have wrestled animals know when the animal has stopped trying to learn and started waiting to kill. Tomorrow, or the day after, and not alone. Quentyn stepped back, not in surrender, but as a man gives a thing to a stubborn mule by placing it near, and then looking away, and letting pride do its work. They left meat there, not too near. They left the jar. They left the rope, because a certain kind of foolish hope believes in symbols, and layman's rope has served gods since men learned to bind bundles. Rhaegal did not eat while they watched. Dragons do not perform kindness. They rose again, and the heat of the pyramid combed their hair, and wrapped them in its damp blanket, and let them go. Quentyn stood in the court with his head back, and the river's air washing the sweat off his face, and did not feel weak that he had not forced a miracle. He felt wise. He had never liked wisdom. It tasted like patience that had been left in a cask too long. Today, it tasted like water. In the days that followed, their pattern became a rhythm the city could dance to without learning it. Strike at dawn, breathe at noon, bargain in the afternoon. Listen for horns from the bay in the evening. Sleep in parts, wake in pieces, mend by talking. Skahaz came to him with a list of men whose names wanted ink. He signed where he could and left space where he could not. Barristan brought him a harness that would pinch less and chafe more and possibly keep him alive enough to be annoyed by both facts. The green grace sent figs that tasted of salt because everything here did. Quentyn ate them and did not pretend they were sweet as those at home. He sent word west where he could. Ships could not be trusted to carry the truth, but he sent the shape of it with men who could draw, and men who could speak soft, and men who could show the scars on their hands and point to the dragon with their chins when asked to prove they had seen it. He wrote a letter to his father that had no poetry in it, and none was required. He told the truth as a man tells a woman when he learns not to flatter her because she is beyond it. He wrote to Arianne and said simply, "I will bring you a story or a wound you cannot stop teasing me about." He did not send the letter to his sister, because sending letters to women men loved had learned to attract knives in ways that could be blamed upon romance. He folded it into his jerkin and wore it near his ribs, as if a letter could be diplomacy's mail. He learned Meraine's turns, its corners where men stabbed and its alleys where men were kind if no one was watching. He learned the names of the boys who had lifted their hands when he had flown low: Herion, Baal, Tolos. He learned the names of 3 women who sold water sweetened with melted ice at dawn, a thing that made Meereen seems magic again in a way that dragons could not. He learned where the men who loved the queen told jokes that would get them killed if told to the wrong uncle. He learned where sons of the harpy laid brows in their hands and wept, because they were tired of being brave for men who had never risked a day in their lives. He learned that he could love a city that had tried to kill him twice before breakfast, because the people in it had shown him the thing that men always show each other when they are exhausted and have no time to be cruel. The little nod, the little hand upon the wrist, the little shrug that says we go on, because we must. The Iron Men shouted and sang and bled and died and took a name for Quentyn they thought was clever and bawdy and not too insulting. The windblown came and went and came. A tide that tattered prince had taught to listen to him, and to gold, and sometimes to honor. The slavers burned rope and paper and a small shrine to a god who had not listened in a very long time. The horn blew twice more and then was silent, or the men who blown it were, which came to the same thing. On the 10th night, when Quentyn could not sleep, because Viserion had decided to lie very still and let his great chest fill the court with the slow, thoughtful sound of a forge bellows, he rose and walked the corridors without a torch. His feet found the niches by knowing, not sight. He came to the balcony that looked down upon a small square where once he had watched the queen listen to men talk of grain as if grain were glory. The square was empty now, but for a dog with one ear and the ghost of its own fleas. The air smelled of stone and onion and sweat. Far away, a woman's laughter cracked and then repaired itself and went on. He leaned on the parapet and let his hands be cool on old rock. He heard the step beside him, and his body, which had begun to know such things, did not start. "My prince," Viserion said, "and let the title be a kindness tonight, not a duty. You do not sleep when a man should." Quentyn huffed. "I sleep when the dragon does," he said. "He's considerate. He gives me moments and then takes them away to remind me I am not the only creature in this room." "Thou." Viserion's white hair made a pale halo in the thin light. "You are doing well," he said. It was not flattery. It was as near to a blessing as the old knight ever came. "You have resisted 3 temptations in as many days. That is more than I see some men manage in 3 lives." "And shall only 3?" Quentyn asked, dry. "Only 3 that matter yet," Viserion said. "To believe the dragon is yours. To believe the people are yours. To believe the war will let you go when you ask it." He rested his hands upon the stone as Quentyn had. "Do not believe any of those. They will keep loving you if you do not make them do it. Then you're done." Quentyn wanted to say, "I am a patient man, not a wise one." He said instead, "Will the queen come back?" Viserion was silent a long time. He had the gift of men who have learned that silence saves more lives than it costs. At last he said, "Yes." He did not say how he knew. He did not say when. He did not say in what form she would be. Girl, queen, conqueror, penitent? She has fire that does not go out with wind. He lifted his head and looked at the dark that held its breath around them. "When she comes, she will need to see that we have not become what she fought to unmake." "We are setting men afire," Quentyn said. He kept his voice very even. "We are," Viserion said. He did not justify. He did not console. "And we are keeping children from sickness, and keeping bread from being stolen out of women's mouths, and stopping men who like to hurt from having too many chances to do it. The scales will never balance. We are not asked to balance them. We are asked to put our weight where we would want others to put theirs when we are not here to do it." He paused. "She knew that before you and I were born." Quentyn bowed his head. He had never loved Daenerys Targaryen. He loved Dorne, which loved Nymeria. He loved the thought of a queen who had a right that was not purchased in a market. Standing with Viserion in the night, with the river whispering to people who could not sleep and a dog cleaning its paw industriously, he thought that his love might grow for this girl he hardly knew. He thought, gently, that it might not, and that he would still be faithful. The days went on. They made of them something like a rope by braiding habits. The rope could still snap. Quentyn felt every fiber. The battle outside the city became a quarrel as much as a war. The Iron Men demanding blood's old rent. The slavers too proud to plead even when pleading would save them. The sellswords counting their coppers and their friends' mouths and deciding whether hunger tasted worse than shame. Meereen began to be less afraid of mourning. Children came to the court to stand at the very edge of where Skahaz's men had drawn a line and look up and say nothing, and then go away carrying pieces of the day that would become later their stories, the kind men tell to other men's grandchildren. On the 12th day, Quentyn went again to Rhaegal. He did not bring blood this time. He brought meat and patience. He brought a length of chain taken from an engine's broken arm. He did not know why until he saw the dragon's eye catch the cold of iron and narrow, as if to say, "This is my enemy and I can smell it in my sleep." He set the chain between them. He sat cross-legged with his back to a pillar and waited. Garrus slept. Arch watched without blinking. The Unsullied stood with that perfect stillness that is not rest, but is not fatigue either. Rhaegal breathed. After a time that was a song in itself, the green tongue came out and took the meat. It did not touch the chain. Quentyn smiled without showing his teeth, because somehow that felt like wisdom. He slept a little sitting up, and when he woke, the chain was in 2 pieces, and he did not know when, and did not need to. He stood and bowed to the dragon without irony, a small courtesy that men give to gods they do not worship, and therefore do not fear in the same way. The next morning he flew again. The straps kept him. The seat bruised him. The wind taught him. He looked down upon a world that had decided, for a handful of days, to be a thing he could love more than loathe. He saw men raising their heads to the sun as if the sun might say their names. He saw women washing clothes in the river and beating the cloth with sticks as if to punish it for failing to cover enough of their children. He saw a boy with a stick and a hoop, running in such perfect concentration that he could have led a state if you gave him one. He saw the slavers' camp look smaller. He saw the iron ships leave men in their wake and take men into their bellies. He saw the windblown's flag do the small thing a flag does when it has decided hope tastes better than bread. He turned Viserion's head toward the open, for a breath only. The dragon felt the sky beyond the bay like a dog at a hole beneath a fence. Smelling a world of rabbits. He took one more beat of wing than ever before, and the world became larger. Quentyn could have wept for the size of it. He could have laughed for the terror. He did neither. He patted the neck. "Later," he said. "Later, we go where the air has not been weighed." They curved back. Meereen took them again into its hot cup and did not crush them. Quentyn put his hand on the dragon's hide and felt heat and pride in amounts he could spend. He thought of his father writing with small, careful characters in a book that another man would not see for months. He thought of his sister lifting her chin and making a joke, because to not make a joke would be to admit a thing too big to be kind to anyone. He thought of a queen on a black dragon somewhere far inland, where the grass goes on forever, and men become dots upon it like seeds. A queen who had flown because she had to remember something about herself that could not be remembered on a chair. He hoped she would remember the city as a place that had not betrayed her while she was gone. He hoped she would not burn him for standing in her doorway. The day spilled onward, respectful of no man's plans. A runner came from the wall with news of a parley that had been called or a trap that had been set. The words are kin. Skahaz asked Quentyn if he felt like being shown off, and Quentyn said he felt like flight, and Skahaz said that was the same thing, and they smiled at each other like men trusted by no one who had decided to trust each other until a better betrayal came along. Barristan asked for a list of boys to be trained with spears who had never held one, and Quentyn gave it, because he had learned 3 names a day, and could now put them in order if asked. The green grace brought bread, and said, "Do not make of bread a miracle," and Quentyn said, "We are hungry enough not to." At dusk, the iron men lit fires that spelled something obscene in their language, and men roared because men do. The slavers lit fires that spelled nothing. The horn did not blow. Viserion slept with his head upon the warm stone and his eyes slit open, and then shut with lazy disgust, when a moth landed upon the edge of it and beat its small fool wings. Rhaegal in the deep breathed, and the chain in Quentyn's mind felt a little less heavy than it had when he had first stepped into that room of hot iron and breath. Night wrapped Meereen. The city did not purr, because cities do not purr. They creaked and scratched and whispered and dreamed. Quentyn lay down on the rug he had not yet learned to find comfortable, and let his body remember itself without a saddle. He had done impossible things and had not died. He had learned instead of mastered. He had burned with care and not with greed. He would go on. He would break more engines and refuse to kill boys and kill men who deserved better than a clean death, and better than any death at all. He would give the windblown their moment, and then see what it had bought and decide whether to be stingy or prodigal with it. He would try the green again and again until the dragon decided that this small persistent mammal, at the edge of his vision, might be tolerated at his shoulder. He would send word west whenever he could, and say the truth and nothing but, which is the worst way to send word, and the only way that matters. He would keep his face composed when he learned that men in Dorne had taken his name and made of it a picture that made them braver. He would wait for the queen without making an altar of the waiting. He would resist the horn by being water and not stone. He would be necessary for as short a time as he could manage, and useful for as long. He would say please and thank you to the leather workers, and the boys who brought water, and the old woman who showed him where the stone steps were worn low by men with heavier boots, so he could set his own foot in the hollow and be steadier. He would try not to fall in love with his dragon, and would fail, and would learn to live with that failure without making it anyone else's problem. He slept. Finally, the dragon breathed. The river talked in its sleep. The horn, somewhere beyond, lay heavy and sullen, wanting to be called again, wanting to hurt. The city did not stop being itself, cruel and generous, proud and ridiculous, a place where men set prices on everything and yet gave much away. In the morning there would be ropes to burn, and in the afternoon words to weigh. And at night the sky would be big and unapologetic, and somewhere far inland a black shape would cut the grass's shadow, and a girl whose name men feared and loved would taste dust and remember the salt air and turn a little toward it as a man turns toward home when the wind carries a familiar kitchen out to meet. The war would hold its bowl out and ask to be fed. Quentyn would place in it what he could and keep enough to live, to put more later. He had chosen, and the choosing would become a habit, and the habit would become a path, and the path would go on until a queen came and said, with a voice that made dragons turn their heads, whether his path ran beside hers or under it. And when dawn returned, mean and glittering, he rose with it and put his hand upon the white hide and said, as if greeting a friend in a city where nothing is easy, "Good morning." Yeah, key. Morning came narrow and mean and glittering, and still the city rose to it with a stubbornness that had nothing to do with hope. The court filled with the little businesses that make days, water dragged in sloshing skins from the cisterns, bread broken on the edges of knives, armor buckles tugged and retugged by hands that wanted to be busy, because idle hands begin tallying the price a man cannot afford. Viserion lifted his head as if to test the hour with his nostrils, then set it down again with the grave assurance of a creature whose bones have never learned to apologize. Quentyn woke with stiffness laid end to end along his spine like coins in a purse. When he rolled, the armor welts made themselves known as individual men at a muster, each eager to declare his importance. He stood despite them, and found that today the world did not tilt, that he had slept enough to be a man, and not merely an argument carried around by his own will. He washed at the fountain, and the water had the fine shock it always did, a slap from a friend you trusted to tell you when you were being stupid. Skahaz had started his day before dawn. He always did, as if the sun hated him, and he took a vindictive pleasure in stealing the hour she loved most. He stood with his mask in his hands as if the thing were a lover he did not trust. Barristan came, pale and neat, his white hair pulled back with the kind of discipline a man does not abandon even when there is no need to keep up appearances. Discipline is not for appearances. Garrus sprawled on the coping in a way that looked idle and was not. His eyes counted every man who passed as if they were the beads of a rosary he did not believe in. An arch had a loaf under one arm that looked small until he put his thumb against it and tore away a quarter as if he were removing a splinter from his own flesh. The Iron Men have moved their ships into a tighter circle, Barristan said without preface. They have a captain who loves geometry. We will not rely upon their love of us, only upon their love of killing other men who do not pay them. They send a spokesman. Skahaz added, not the bearded giant, another with a face like a fist. He wishes to see the dragon up close and smell our breath and decide whether to praise our courage or take it as an insult. Then thou. Let him see what the city looks like from a mouth that is not his, Quentyn said. He did not add that Viserion Greyjoy, the name sat in his mind like a lump of iron, would not be the sort of man to send a subordinate who might be more clever than he. Men like that sent the sort who admired the way their captains breathed. The envoy came with 2 men at his back, and the smell of salt around him as if he had been soaked in brine and hung to dry. He wore iron like another man might wear silk, as if he expected the fabric to ask permission. He saw Viserion and did not kneel. He did not boast. He smiled in a way that had no fellowship in it. His eyes flicked to Quentyn and found a prince more thin than he had expected perhaps, more sober, with a beard trimmed as if he had the spare time to fiddle with such things. And then those eyes moved on to Skahaz with the open contempt seamen have for landmen who have turned themselves into animals, and then to Barristan with a moment of hesitation that men sometimes felt when they stood before a story and discovered it had a back and a belly and a smell. My lord comes with iron and gifts, the envoy said, in a common traded over too many warbs. He asks with courtesy for the Queen of Dragons' hand, and will take with courtesy if denied. His smile was so soft it had the smell of a knife's oil. Hay counsels that men not stand too near the horn when it speaks again. It does not love the ears of cowards. Skahaz's mouth twitched. Then we shall stand afar and be brave, he said. Tell your lord we have hands more than he has fingers, and we will use them to make the shape that suits us. He turned his head a fraction. Prince Quentyn has also a question or two to ask the sea. Quentyn stepped up and did not play at more height than he had. Tell your lord, he said, that the queen is not here to be asked or taken, and that men who think to marry her without the courtesy of her presence have an odd way with vows. Tell him that if he loves the sight of fire upon black water, he may have his fill before this is done, but that no horn will call my dragon to his deck. Tell him that if he sends down his priest to bless our kitchens and not our throats, he will find we have salt enough to cook with. He did not know why he said that last until he pictured the priest with the crimson scarf and the child's smile. Men like that love to put their gods into other men's pots and declare the stew holy when it boiled. Tell him that Dorne makes its own bargains. The envoy's eyes moved to the white hide at his back. It is a fair beast, he observed, and his voice softened in a way that reminded Quentyn of men looking at well-balanced axes. My lord has brought a horn that makes fair beasts remember who made them to begin with. The world made them, Quentyn said, calm. Men merely like to write their names upon it afterward. He did not reach for his knife. He did not need a knife. The envoy watched him a heartbeat too long, then smiled and bowed stiffly. My lord says come and see his generosity, the envoy said, straightening. My lord says he will teach you to win. I have been learning, Quentyn answered. Tell him I prefer the lessons that do not kill the masters. He turned away without dismissing the man, because dismissal is what you give to the people you think you will never have to see again, and the sea is patient. When the iron men had gone and the court had exhaled, Skahaz laughed softly. You do not bark, he said to Quentyn. You bare your teeth with the politeness of a well-bred hound, and make a man wonder whether his trousers are about to be taken at the knee. I do not have your taste for blood, Quentyn said. No. Skahaz agreed blandly. You have my taste for making other men think better of themselves until it is time to cut their expectations into smaller pieces. They did not waste themselves upon iron. There was rope and wood near at hand that wanted their attention. At dawn they went out, and the engines that had been repaired badly with shame-proud hands yielded quickly to breath that had learned finesse. Quentyn began to love not the burning but the moments right before, when he could see the weakness in a thing, and choose to be gentle and still break it. It was a prideful love. He kept it on a short chain in his chest. He did not speak of it to Garrus, who would have teased him into admission. He did not speak of it to Arch, who would have looked at him with his ox patience and waited for him to discover the rest on his own. The city found itself a new business. Men with long ladders and thick hide buckets following Quentyn's flight along the wall, so that when a burning engine threw a spiteful piece into the air toward the city, 10 hands were there to smother it with wet cowhide in shame. Boys with little brass whistles ran messages ahead and behind, not because they had been told to, but because boys love to blow. whistles, and be important. Women with cloths over their mouths shook lime from baskets in patterns that made sense to them and to no one else. When Quentyn asked, one grinned and said, "It keeps me from thinking of my old man's coughing," which is the kind of reason any commander should accept without question. By afternoon, the heat made men moral. They did not quarrel because quarreling takes breath, and breath was for walking and lifting and moaning quietly. When a man thought no one was listening, Quentyn used those hours to be seen where he had not been seen yesterday. A prince who is always in the sky looks like a god and is easier to hate. A prince who stoops and takes a pail of water from an old woman's hand and carries it 6 steps because her knees wobble becomes a man and can be forgiven many things. If he had learned anything here, it was that forgiveness in cities is a commodity like salt, dear, and suddenly scarce and absolutely necessary. He did not forget the green. Sometimes at noon, sometimes when night had come, and the court was mostly quiet, save for the dragon's bellows, and a soft cough in some corner where a man tried to be shameful without being heard, he went down into the hot place. He did not always bring blood. Once he brought nothing but patience. Once he brought a half-sung Roiner song his mother had taught him that spoke of a boat that had discovered a sandbar where there had not been one and had decided not to be ashamed of its foolishness. Once he brought a piece of bronze polished until it became a coin of light, and he let it catch the torch and make green glimmers on the ceiling, so that Rhaegal's eye could watch them and decide whether to hate them. The chain remained. It was the city's chain and could not be taken without men making a noise. He did not yet want the noise. But the link slept easier each day, as if the dragon's body had learned not to fight every ring with all its strength when not moved. On a night when thunder strode about somewhere inland and the wind brought the scent of dust and horses and far fires, Quentyn sat and watched the green one sleep. Rhaegal slept badly. He twitched. His foreclaws flexed. His flanks trembled as if he were running in a dream where gates open and close with a malice all their own. Quentyn had seen boys in Dorne sleep like that, when their fathers insisted on spears in their hands, before they had hair upon their chins. He had slept like that when word had come of his mother's sickness, and his father had not closed his eyes for 2 days, and had still given judgments that had made the city call him just. "Brother," he said softly again. "Not mine. His. But I will borrow the name if it pleases you." The eye slid open. No human pupils there. Only a slit that widened as light finds its courage. The nostrils flared. The breath came long and broke and came again. The dragon did not move his head. He did not close his eye. He endured this human's voice as a man on a long road endures a small stone in his boot, not because it does not hurt, but because stopping to remove it would be an admission that time can be bullied by comfort. "Tomorrow," Quentyn promised, to both of them. "If the sky allows. If the city does not bite." His hand stung where the old cut had tightened again, new skin wanting to dance and being pulled back into line. He laughed at himself, quietly, and let the heat take the sound. Skahaz's nets along the street of Kaskari princes pulled in more fish than any fisherman could clean before the meat spoiled. Some wore tattoos like little window grates at their throats. Some wore rings cut with the emblems of houses that had been proud when Meereen was new. Some were boys who had let their mouths run too free over dates and black beer while the wrong ears stood near. The Shavapate did not mock. He used them like a butcher uses trimmings, to flavor a broth you would not otherwise drink. When Barristan protested the roughness of his recipes, Skahaz listened with a courtesy that made a man grateful, and then did as he pleased. Once, 3 men in jackal masks came at Quentyn in a passage that held too much shadow for anyone's health. They were quick, and they were clean, and they were sure of the way the prince's steps fell because they had sat for 2 nights on a stair and heard them. Garrus took a knife in the arm because he offered his arm to the knife instead of his throat to the second blade. He did it with a sigh, as if he were paying a bill a fool younger self had run up. Arch began gentle, and ended not. One jackal's mask cracked and fell and showed a face that had laughed in a court 2 months ago when a poem was read that could cut, and had been wielded as a weapon. That face made a sound like a pig's last breath, and turned uglier than his mask had been. The other 2 ran. One stumbled, and Quentyn's hand found his collar the way a crane's beak finds a frog and pulled him back into the light. The boy under the mask could not have been 20. He had eyes like coins someone had shaved thin at the edges and tried to pass. He defied them, and he begged them, and he shook until the mask vibrated on the stone where Arch had tossed it, and Quentyn felt an old familiar sickness that had nothing to do with the pale mare. He let Skahaz's men take the boy. He did not go to see what Skahaz would ask and how the boy would answer. He stood at the court's edge and put his hand on Viserion, and told himself that being alive meant learning to keep your eyes open, and your kindness from leaking where it would drown you. Brown Ben Plum came with 2 men and a flag that had been cleaned too often. The blue had washed out of it until it looked like the tired sky. He walked with a swagger that would have been unbearable if he hadn't also looked like a man who could laugh at himself immediately after. He asked to see the dragon, and let his eyes do the rest. Dragons liked him, or he liked himself in a way that made dragons less wary of the human stink. Quentyn could not tell and did not ask. Viserion, unlike Rhaegal, did not have opinions packaged in grudges. He gave the sellsword 2 sniffs and a rumble that would have made other men piss, and then turned his head away in that deliberate insult that says, "I do not mind your presence as long as you are equipped." "They know their own," Brown Ben said, pleased with himself. "What brings you, Ben?" Barristan asked, with the kind of dryness that can strip varnish. "A new price." "A truth," the sellsword said, teeth very white in his fringed gray beard. "The Yunkai plan a stroke at dawn, not at the walls. At the wells. They will poison the cisterns we dug out back, when I still knew the Queen's temper, and liked it. I'd like to see them try. I'd like to see you not caught by the ankle." "Bah! How do you know?" Skahaz demanded. "Which cousin brought you this gift to buy himself a kinder death?" Brown Ben tapped his nose. "A cat. The company of the cat is in a humor to brag. They do not like me, and I them even less, which is why they boast. Men boast to insult a foe into foolishness. I am too old to be insulted into anything. I bring this to you because, Skahaz, I would rather take a purse from a clever enemy than eat the liver of a stupid friend. Prince," he turned his head with an easy respect, "if the Queen comes back, tell her I came to warn." "If the Queen comes back," Barristan said softly, "you will have much more than that to tell her. They posted men at the cisterns through the night. They posted women too. One had a ladle with a handle like a spear, and a look that said she had poured broth for men who had thought the ladle a safe thing to laugh at, and had hit them in the mouth with it when they did. Just before dawn, in the hour when human efforts looked their most foolish and their most necessary. 3 men in the brown rags of shit carters, and one with a cart that smelled exactly as it ought, thanks to Skahaz's ability to make the world his accomplice, came to the 3rd cistern and tried to lift its lid as a man lifts a cover from a dish when he has brought poison to supper. They did not run. They fought hard and well, and with the silent ferocity of men who knew precisely why they were doing what they were doing, and had made their peace with it. 2 died with their mouths folded tight, as if to keep names from falling out of them. 1 tried to run, and a woman with a ladle spear took him in the back of the knee and made him tell a story. Skahaz listened and never once interrupted, and when it was done, he nodded thoughtfully, as if the tale had been well-shaped and the boy a promising student. Quentyn felt the old sickness and the new pride do battle in his middle, and when it was over, they shook hands and agreed neither had won. He went to the river in the hour after to breathe. The water had a new stink. Men had been washing their courage there, and courage leaves a film. The reeds hissed when the wind came the right way. A sound like a kitchen full of women at noon, when the world is allowed to be trivial. Because if it is not allowed a little triviality, it will fly apart. A boy who had been one of those who lifted his hand to the dragon, Viserion, sat on a flat stone and threw pebbles and tried to look as if the pebbles' arcs were the most important thing in the world. Quentyn sat beside him and did not make the boy run by making him respect too much. "Do you like the dragon?" Viserion asked abruptly in that way that children have of putting a sword through a man's most careful veil. "I like the part of me he wakes," Quentyn said after a moment. "It is a useful part. I do not trust it." He expected Viserion to not understand. The boy considered and nodded, the way only boys and old men nod when they are trying not to be frightened of a truth. "My father says men should not fly," Viserion said. "He says if we were meant to fly, the gods would have given us fewer reasons to stay." "Your father is a wise man," Quentyn said. "And yet here we are." He flicked a pebble and tried to make it skip. It sank like a promise made too quickly. Viserion snorted, delighted. As if princes failing at stones were better entertainment than any juggler. The horn did not sound that day. It sounded the next, and the next, weaker each time, like a boast repeated too often, and beginning to be believed only by the boaster. The Iron Men lost 3 ships, and took 9 too. They did not much care which 9. Viserion stood and bled from one ear and did not notice, and the priest beside him smiled, as if the iron in the man's blood were singing in a key he had been waiting to hear since he was a boy. Quentyn kept out of range and watched for the men around the horn, and did what he could to put discomfort there. An open sore below a drummer's skin is not much, until the drummer must hold his stick without flinching. In the city, his Darzo-Larak sat in a room with no window and argued with air. He sent for Quentyn or Skahaz every day, and was given silence in return. The man's pride did not strip down because it had never learned how to undress without help. But on a day when Quentyn's courtesy was still intact, he went to see him. Hisdar rose from the mat and spread his hands, a practiced gesture that had bought this man bread for years. "Prince," he said warmly, "it pleases me beyond measure to see a familiar face that is not separated from me by a mask. We Hiskari do not like to speak to animals. We prefer men." His eyes glittered. He had not lost all his teeth to Skahaz, only the illusion that those teeth would keep him safe. "I am told you have found a way to make yourself welcome in a city that is not yours," he went on. "That is a skill my family has practiced for a long time." Quentyn did not sit. It did not seem right to sit with a man who had ordered boys to be killed for the shape of their masks. "You chained them," he said. "It was the last thing you did as king. I have unchained one because I thought it useful. I will not apologize for either act. Forgiveness is not mine to take nor to give." He stepped nearer, and his Dar's perfume did its best to turn the cell into a court. "You cultivated enemies and called them friends, and cultivated friends, and called them enemies." Quentyn went on, as if reciting a list of spices in a recipe. "Tell me which you regret." Hisdar smiled because he could not imagine a face that did not. "I regret that I was not given time. All men need time to turn enemies into friends. The queen wanted to use love as a smith's hammer. The world is forged with fear. To be loved is to be killed later, when love turns. To be feared is to be spared for a time because men are cowards. You are learning this, if you are learning anything." His gaze slid over Quentyn's jerkin and the leather ring of the harness on his shoulder. "And you are learning much." "I am," Quentyn agreed. "One thing I have learned is that men who are eager to share their wisdom are always eager to be forgiven without asking." He put his hands together, not as a suppliant to a god, but as a man readying his fingers to bind rope. "If the queen returns, what will you tell her?" "That I guarded her city," Hisdar said promptly. He had practiced. "That I kept the peace as best could be kept under the circumstances. That I welcomed her friends and endured her enemies. That I placed the chains on the dragons to keep her from being hurt by them." His lips tightened for the first time. "That I did not order the knives." "A king does not need to order the knives. They are always ready," he added, and the bitterness of the man persuaded Quentyn more than his soft phrases had. Quentyn left him without answering, because a prince's answer is easy to pocket and spend later against him. Outside, the corridors smelled of oil and dust, and a faint ginger steam from some pot left too long. Viserion's heat reached him there. It had begun to mark the stone, a mellowing that made the pyramid seem briefly like part of a living thing, rather than a monument to men who had thought stone could make them gods. On the 14th morning, the sky clothed itself with a low, dirty cloud that made the city blink and find everything unfamiliar. The Iron Men did not like it. Their oars dragged and plashed out of rhythm, and some sea god with a mean sense of humor sent a ridiculous choppy swell in to slap the galley's flanks and make neat rows of men lose their timing. The slavers liked it too much. They thought fogs were gods' veils, and that the gods who wore them would favor men whose temples had known their names longer. The windblown took the day to count coin out loud, and remind each other that being paid is a pleasure best enjoyed when it is taken, not merely promised. "We will not fly far," Quentyn told Viserion, his voice pressed flat by the weather. He did not intend to fly at all. Then he thought of ropes wound carefully on drums and grease, warmed by men's hands, and the way wet wood smokes before it burns and smells like a prayer gone wrong. And he put his foot into the leather and went up. The air had weight. It was not the weight of heat. It was the weight of a presence that does not care about men's choices. Viserion cut it anyway, because if anything could not care about men's choices, it was this white thing. They burst out of the low lid as a man pulls his head from a sack. The blue above was so cold and brilliant that Quentyn's eyes watered. He let the dragon level and remembered that heights you earn with labor taste better than heights you fall into. From up there the world made sense in a way it never did on the ground. The slavers' camp had a logic to it, like a miser's room. Counting tables here, counting tents there, kitchens where the same thin soup repeated itself until men forgot their mothers' broths. The Iron Fleet was a metaphor for knives planted in a loaf. The city was a structure a man could imagine repairing without handing his entire self to it. From up there a prince could believe himself wise. Quentyn leaned into the wind and made himself remember the smell of the cistern lids and the sound a boy's pebble makes when it sinks. They did not burn much that day. They flamed the edge of a new-built tower whose men had sworn to the ropes with tears and told those ropes their children's names so the ropes would hold. Men who weep when they tie knots deserve their knots to be cut. They warmed a scorpion enough to make its keeper curse and shake a fist, and then later give up and go to find a piece of metal to fix it. Breathing on a man's work without ruining it is a better way to break him than destroying it at once. They returned early with the air in their throats cold and mean, and tasted ash and onion, and made their plans for the night. That evening Mokoro came. He did not announce himself. Men like him do not announce themselves because their gods do it for them. He walked into the court with his red scarf, and the smile that did not quite fit his face, and his hair flowing like a warrior's and his hands bare. Because a man who trusts fire to be his friend is conspicuous with his fingers. The brazen beasts did not try to bar him. Two had burned their hands in a kitchen 3 nights ago, and he had touched their palms, and the pain had walked away like a thief, asked too kindly to leave. "Prince," he said as if they were alone. He smelled of char and cinnamon, and a little of the wine men pour on the ground when they ask dead friends to come back and drink. "I have dreamed of you near the mouth of a wooden beast with an iron belly, and you did not go in. Good. I have dreamed of you upon a white storm and a green hill that refused to be a friend and learned to be. Good. I have dreamed of your mouth making promises hard enough to wear like a ring." He smiled as if he were proud of Quentyn for having a mouth. "I have dreamed of a woman whose hair is smoke and whose eyes are knives, and you do not cut yourself on them because you are too careful to touch." His eyes softened suddenly. "I have dreamed of old men in cool rooms in a hot land whose patience has bred dragons in boys without flame." "Good," he said again, as if repeating the word would make it belong to him. "I do not like men looking in my rooms and calling my rugs old," Quentyn said, dry. "But I have no rug to throw over your head and smother you." He gestured, and a boy brought the priest water. Mokoro took it and sipped and smiled, as if the water were a blessing from his own god. Which perhaps it was. The god men carry with them often blesses what they would bless themselves. "The horn will blow again," Mokoro said. "It will blow less here than before. Iron is disobedient if it is not loved. Your dragon will remember more each time that the sound is an insult, not a name. Be water. Do not be stone. You and Skahaz would like each other if you could both stop counting," Quentyn said. He met the priest's eyes and found there not the oily flattery he had expected. Not the greed that masked itself with sanctity, but an odd steadiness. "What do you want?" "To see the queen," Mokoro said simply. "To see if the fire in her is the fire my god has taught me to love. To use that fire to burn things my god dislikes. To become more myself for having known her." He spread his hands in a gesture that mocked and honored prayer. To strike men who think chains are the only way to write a poem upon the world. I cannot give you that, Quentyn said. I can give you a city that is trying to deserve her. He glanced at Viserion, who slept with a hind claw lifted, so that the membrane between the toes looked like a piece of tan silk hanging on a line. And I can give you a dragon whose pride will not be a temple. That is what I have. It is enough, Moqorro said. He bowed slightly, not to Quentyn but to the shape of the future that had decided to stand in this court for a while and be fed. Do not let the Green One insult you, he added over his shoulder, as if he were telling a boy not to let a dog steal his bread. He will. Do not let him. He went as he had come, without the courtesy of leaving a blessing behind that could be counted later as a coin. That night the horns from the bay called and called, not the dragon horn but the human sort that shouts for men to move, and is ignored by those who think they are already on the right road. The Iron Men and the Slavers and the Cats and the Windshifters all had things to say about how the moon wished them to behave. Quentyn did not listen. He took Viserion to the wall and sat upon the saddle, and let his legs dangle, and thought of Dorne, until the ache became a thing he could put a name to, and put away so he could think of Meereen without hating himself. By the 18th day, the city could almost imagine that there would be an end to the siege that did not involve all their babies dying in a neat row from the pale mare. Skahaz's men had made the well safe enough to drink without tasting other people's plans. The Windblown had committed themselves sufficiently that even if they wanted to change their minds, the new employers would kill them just to make a point, which is a kind of commitment a sellsword can live with. The Iron Men had discovered the joy of taking ships built by men who thought carving eyes into prows would make them able to see. They did not stop to admire their work. Rhaegal had stopped striking his chain when he breathed. He watched when Quentyn came, and sometimes he closed his eye when Quentyn spoke, but not in mockery, in comfort. On a day when the air pressed close and the river had the taste of frogs and old iron, and a lightning that found no cloud to hide in, Quentyn went to Skahaz with a thing he had been carrying like a hot pomegranate too long. "We will take off the ring," he said, "the floor ring at the Green One's throat. I cannot tame a neck held down like a prisoner whose confession is not yet complete. We will take off the ring and make the chain run higher where it binds nothing but pride. Tamed." Skahaz looked at him for a long silent time that made the court's fountain seem a noisy old woman. "If you cannot hold him," the Shavapate observed softly, "we die in a new way. I like new ways poorly unless I think of them myself." Then he laughed without mirth. "Good. Better to die of our own courage than of other men's fear. How many men do you need to place your hands upon that iron, and not upon your own eyes when they melt?" "Men?" "4, Quentyn said. "With helmets. With gloves soaked in vinegar and wrapped about with wet leather. With hearts that beat slower than most. 3 in arch," Skahaz corrected. "The 4th stands behind you, and is yours already." He sobered. "Do it at night. Not because dragons are less proud at night. Because men are. They did it between the hours when whores stretch and soldiers snore, and the women who have washed the day away sit with their feet in basins and let their calves stop shouting at them. They brought wedges and hammers and a bar that had been a scorpion's arm, and now pretended to be a pry. The iron ring had been set by men who were proud of the hinge. It had 13 rivets. Skahaz's clerk had counted and reported as if those numbers were a prayer he could carry to his grave. The first hammer blow rang through the chamber and made Viserion lift his head on the far side and watch with a fish's blank curiosity. Rhaegal's eye opened and then closed, and then opened again. Quentyn spoke without words. Garrus whispered something wicked to the hammer and made it laugh. Arch stood like a wall that a city could be built against, and then ignored because it had never fallen. The first rivet spat out with the sulking reluctance of a fat man pulled from his favorite chair. The second fought so hard that sweat ran into a boy's eyes under his helmet, and made him misjudge the next stroke and catch his own thumb. He did not call out. Arch took his place without asking, and the boy stood pressing his hand to his belly as if he had been stabbed and not merely told by the world that he was mortal. The third came, the fourth. The fifth refused, and then came all at once and almost threw Garrus off his feet. Quentyn held the bar and felt his ribs complain and felt the heat through the wet leather and thought, strangely, of small bright lizards on Dornish walls, sunning themselves, and of the old women who muttered that lizards were omens if you knew the alphabet of their tails. He laughed under his breath, because if there were an alphabet for dragons, it was written in a hand no man could teach. On the 12th rivet, Rhaegal blew. He did it in irritation, not malice. A short huff of heat that would have lit a cookfire sharply, and was merely a sigh in this place. The leather on Quentyn's glove tightened and smoked. He did not let go. He bent and put his shoulder beneath the bar, and his cheek near the ring, and the iron whispered to him, a song of the forge it had known before it had been this iron and this ring. He shoved. Arch leaned. The last rivet came like a stubborn child agreeing to go to bed because he had decided he wanted to, not because his mother had insisted. The ring sat loose in its seat. The chain rose, links rasping, and suddenly slack lay where tension had lived for months. And in that slack was a breath the room had not taken, since the queen had made of dragons prisoners, and of herself, a woman men could hurt. Rhaegal lifted his head a fraction. That was all. He would not give them more. Quentyn stepped back and took off his glove and set it down, and then unwound the wet leather from it like a man unswaddling a baby after a fever, and found it intact, and suddenly could have wept with gratitude to a glove. He looked up. Rhaegal's eye was on him. It flicked, very slightly, to the loose ring, then back. If a dragon could be said to consider, this one considered. Tomorrow, Quentyn murmured. Tomorrow I ask more. Tonight we do not boast. The boy whose thumb had been caught put his hand into his mouth and sucked the welt as if it were a sweet. He caught himself and looked ashamed, and then less so, when Quentyn nodded at him as if a man had just done something worthy of a song. Garrus held his hammer like a lover and kissed it, and then laughed at himself and kissed his fingers instead. Arch rubbed his hands together and said, "To no one and to all of them, good." In the days that followed, the ring being gone changed everything and nothing. Rhaegal breathed, and his breathing claimed a wider space. When Quentyn came, he sometimes turned his head now, and the chain moved, and did not protest. The first time Quentyn reached his hand and laid his palm upon green hide, not upon the throat near the chain, but back along the jaw where the scales are smoother and the heat less insistent, the skin under his palm twitched and did not strike. He held it there as you hold a beast that has tolerated you long enough to forget you are separate. He felt the heat and the slow thrum of what a dragon has, instead of a heart. He did not die. He did not become a god. He was a man touching a thing that could kill him, and did not. He took back his hand very carefully, as one takes a knife from a table with children sitting about it. He flew more with the white, less with bravado, and more with curves. He learned the wind's stupidities and kindnesses, as if they were boys in the water gardens, with whom you must play in order to have a full summer. The slavers ran out of men who believed rope could save them. They began to pay more to men who lied well. Brown Ben Plum brought another truth, and another, until Quentyn could not decide which he loved more, the man's treachery or his honesty. The Iron Men began to be bored in the way men who have killed a reasonable number of enemies are bored. Boredom makes men do foolish, brave things, and is as dangerous as hunger. Viserion sent another envoy, this one thin and feverish, with the kind of zeal that makes a man a poor lover and a worse husband. Quentyn smiled at him, and sent him back with a basket of dates, and a message that said the same things with different words, because sometimes the greatest cruelty is to give a man exactly what he expected. In the city, the pale mare limped along. She did not gallop. Men threw lime. Women burned bedding. Children learned the trick of drinking water slowly so their bodies would not spit it out again. The green grace still came sometimes, and sat where the dragon could see her, and did not reach to touch, and told the sort of stories old women tell to boys who do not know yet that those stories are nets for men who will grow into them later. Once she looked at Quentyn with an odd forgiveness and said, "When you are a father, remember to let your children make a few stupid promises. It is good for the soul to be in debt sometimes." And Quentyn did not know whether she meant his promises to her city or to a woman whose hair was smoke and whose eyes were knives. On the 21st day, the windblown made their betrayal formal. They took a banner they had kept wrapped about a spear to keep it clean, a banner with a pattern of diamonds not seen much east of Atlantis, and they raised it in the face of men who had fed them, and then expected to be loved for it. The slavers howled. The Iron Men cheered. The city learned a new song that had no words, only the beat of feet on the wall. Skahaz stood with his hands folded and counted how many men looked away when the flag went up. Those were the men he intended to arrest at dusk. Barristan allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The kind a man gives when he watches a plant he put into poor soil send up one stubborn, green spear. Quentyn did not fly that afternoon. He stood with Rhaegal. He stood and spoke of maps, and of water gardens, and of sisters who do not listen, and of fathers who do, and of the kind of patience that is a blade, not a pillow. And the dragon listened. Near twilight, when dragons decide the day is a toy to be broken, and not a duty to be fulfilled, he set his hand again, and the hide did not twitch. He slid his palm along the jaw, and felt the ridge there, and dared to scratch very lightly where thick scale meets thick scale. The head turned an inch toward him. The eyes slid. It was acknowledgement, not consent. He took what it was. That night, as if all the noisy negotiations and burning and breathing, and boys with whistles had been a prelude rehearsed too long, the sea sent a wind that had not blown in months, cool and frank, a wind that made the city smell new. A cloud lifted off the bay and showed stars that had not been seen since a queen flew away. The iron ships lay black and content. The slavers' tents shivered. Firelight along the camps turned from red to gold to nothing. The great pyramid shed heat like an old man sheds stories, unwillingly but inevitably. Quentyn lay with his arm over his eyes and thought of untying one knot that had waited too long. He did it the next day, because waiting is only wisdom if it means you know what you are waiting for. He took Garrison Arch and the leather worker, with the braid and two more who had proved their hands like their hearts, and he took the new harness that had been stitched with prayers and spit and swearing and oil, and he took a rope with a blade threaded through it the way a woman threads ribbon through a child's shoe. Not because it will be needed, but because it looks kind. He did not take a horn. He did not take a song. He took himself, and that was brave enough for any morning. Rhaegal did not roar at the touch of leather. He did not suffer it with dignity either. He blew, and the smell there grew thick and sweet and violent. He moved his head and Quentyn moved with it, and pretended he had planned the dance to that very step. He laid the pad carefully, and would have bolted if the dragon had shaken once with malice. But Rhaegal did not. He buckled the first strap, and the second, and let the third hang a little looser, because pride must have some space. He set his palm on hide, and the dragon breathed, and did not take the hand away with it. Garrus stood ready to cut him free, not because they expected failure, but because men who do not make an exit have no right to make an entrance. Arch stood with one foot braced and his hands open, and his gaze upon the dragon's eye, as if he were meeting a man in a tavern, where insults sometimes turned into knives, and sometimes into laughter, and he was ready to lean whichever way the night decided. Rhaegal turned his head and put his muzzle near Quentyn's hair and breathed. It seared without scalding. Quentyn closed his eyes because only a fool refuses honesty, and what he felt then was a grief that was not his, an old green grief for sky denied, and for the indignity of iron, and for a distant girl who had given this insult because she had not had any other choice. He opened his eyes with tears he did not attempt to hide. He put his palm upon the jaw again. "I will not put chain on your throat," he said. "I will put it on mine." He looped the rope through the forward horn, and through his own belt ring and back. "If you move, I move. If I move, you do not have to. But I will." The dragon did not understand. The dragon was not a god of bargains. He understood that the thing on his back did not feel like pain, and that the man's heat was not an insult, not today. When Quentyn took the smallest of steps toward the ramp that led toward the ledge, the dragon took it too. His chain rose and sang and did not catch at his throat. It sang again, higher this time, not a distress call, but a warning to iron that pride now had a different route to take. He went 3 paces and stopped, and Quentyn stopped with him. He turned his head until the eye could see the man at his shoulder. The man did not look away. He went 3 more paces. He did not roar. He did not fly. He walked, foot after foot, until the wind that came up the shaft touched his nostrils, and his tongue flicked against it, and his entire body turned toward the smell the way a plant turns its leaves toward sun. They did not go out that day. They went to the lip and looked. Viserion's breath reached them there, a different warmth, not as steady, more arrogant, as if the white dragon thought the world had become a better place because he had taken an interest in it. Meereen lay stretched and exhausted and valiant, like a woman who has given birth and still finds the strength to lift her child. The bay shone in places and sulked in others. The iron ships were quiet. The wind-blown flags drowsed. The slavers' tents had the look that tents have when their poles have begun to wonder whether standing is a good idea. Rhaegal breathed, and his breath tasted of stone and the old blood that had soaked into it, and he did not hate the taste because he had made some of that blood himself. Quentyn put his cheek against green hide and smiled like a man who has negotiated something with himself and won. "Tomorrow," he said, the word a promise and a prayer and a threat. Tomorrow. He did not sleep badly that night. He walked in his sleep, perhaps. Garrus found him at the parapet, with his hands upon the stone, and his face turned toward the bay, as if he were counting. Garrus did not wake him. He stood beside him and counted too. Bones and ropes and boys, with pebbles and old women, with ladles and men, with white hair and masks, with cracks and horns, that would not stop shouting, and dragons that would not be called, except by their own names, which are not words men can speak. At dawn, a gull came in low, and tried to land upon Viserion's back. The dragon snapped lazily, and the bird learned a lesson about presumption too late. Quentyn rose, and went to the green room, and set his palm upon the hide, and felt the dragon beneath it take his measure, and find him neither heavy nor light enough to be swatted in passing. He laughed softly under his breath, a sound only men make when they know they are about to do something that will hurt. He called for the harness. He called for the rope. He called for Arch. He called for Garrus. He did not call for Skahaz. He knew better. The Shavapate came anyway, mask under his arm, eyes bright as if he had been drinking, and had guessed all the jokes. "If you die," Skahaz said pleasantly, "I will say that you promised to, and that you kept your word, and a city will love you for that. If you live, I will say you promised to live, and that you kept your word, and a city will love you for that." He shrugged. "I prefer the second song. It is easier to sing in the right key." Quentyn tied the rope and felt the old leather on his palm warm to his skin as if it were a friend. He set his foot. He swung. He settled. He felt the green give under him the way the white had, but not the same. This was a deeper seat, a rougher ride, a pride that did not think men had any business where they were. He put his cheek to the base of a spine and spoke without words. The dragon moved. They went as far as wind, as far as iron's slackness, as far as Quentyn's courage would stretch without thinning to foolishness. They went far enough that the draft lifted their hair and made the torches flatten like cowed dogs. They went to the lip, and the world reached up and touched them with a wet salt hand, and the dragon trembled, and the man trembled, and neither pretended that the trembling was anything but what it was. They did not fly. They leaned toward flying. It was enough. Down in the camps, some man laughed, and some man screamed. In the city, a child shouted a word that meant dragon, and the first syllable was joy, and the second was fear, and the whole thing was love. On the bay, the iron men beat oars, and the horn that broke men's bones sat silent, because it had learned, however briefly, that sometimes sounding is less useful than listening. The Great Pyramid held its heat and did not collapse merely because 2 beasts inside it had moved differently than yesterday. The sun made its slow promise, and kept it as neatly as a water seller counts change with his thumb. Quentyn touched green and then white, and found they were not the same, and loved both for that. He stood with Barristan on the parapet, and watched Skahaz count, and did not laugh at him. He wrote another letter he would not send and put it in his jerkin, and felt it warm with his heat until it became part of his armor. He went to the river and flicked a pebble and made it skip twice, because sometimes practice is all a man needs. He closed his eyes and took into his lungs the air of a city that wanted to live and of a war that wanted to be fed. And he decided again to feed the one and starve the other, and to bear the consequences like a prince. There would be new engines to burn. There would be boys with whistles to teach when to blow and when not to. There would be women with ladles to arm. There would be iron to endure and horns to despise. There would be men to betray and men to keep, and the sickly sweetness of choosing between them. There would be a girl upon a black dragon somewhere far away who would turn at last, because the wind had brought the smell of the sea, and of a city whose stones had learned to dream. There would be a day when the green moved more than 3 paces, and another when he moved more than 6, and another when the chain hung like a question, and they answered it, slowly, together. There would be a place in the sky that belonged to no one, and yet lent itself to anyone with the lungs and the hands. There would be men who said necessary and meant monster, and men who said monster and meant necessary, and Quentyn would learn to hear the difference and smile at both. He set his palm down and felt the heat answer, and knew the shape of his life again, as if it had been a cup he had set upon a shelf, and now took down to drink from, and he lifted it and did not spill. The day went on. The city did not die. The war did not win. The dragons breathed. The prince learned. The wind turned, and the ropes of the engines on the far side of the river dried faster than the men had guessed, and Quentyn smiled without showing his teeth and went to work.